Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The nation was rocked by the disappearance of Adam Walsh from Hollywood, Florida on July 27, 2981. He vanished from a nearby Sears store, and the ensuing investigation was beset by misunderstandings and errors, leaving detectives frustrated and with dead ends. Adam's family was left in despair when police were unable to piece together a clear timeline or motive despite a plethora of leads. What serious errors occurred during this investigation, and how did the pursuit of justice come to a standstill? Let's examine the specifics. Reeve and John Walsh welcomed Adam Walsh into the world in Hollywood, Florida. He was a normal child who made his parents happy, loved baseball, and was quiet. But after going missing on July 27, 1981, when he was 6 years old, he became well known. Adam and his mother, Reeve, went shopping at the Hollywood Mall that summer afternoon. They went directly to the Sears store after entering the mall via the north entrance. Reeve was there with a specific goal in mind: to ask questions regarding a lamp that was for sale. She left Adam at a kiosk with Atari 2600 video games, where a number of other boys were gathered and playing the games, to keep him occupied while she took care of her business. Around 12:15 p.m., Rev finished her questions in the lamp department and went back to the kiosk where she had left Adam. Adam and the other boys were gone, and she was shocked to find this out. Rev was overcome with fear, as any parent would be when they lose sight of their child. She was told by a store manager that the boys had gotten into a fight over who would get to play the video games first. A security guard responded to the commotion by telling the boys to leave the store. The older boys responded that their parents were not present in the store when the guard asked them if they were. This implied that Adam, who was quieter and younger, probably lacked an adult companion to provide him with support at that time. Adam was a shy kid, and Rev later surmised that he might have been too scared to speak up when the security guard was questioning him. She thought the guard likely didn't realize Adam was alone, because he thought he was one of the boys. The security officer forced Adam to leave through the same door that the other boys had used to enter the store, the Sears West entrance. Adam's parents were increasingly worried about his safety after he went outside because they thought he had lost contact with the group and was now alone in a strange place. As the minutes went by, Rev frantically looked around the toy section for Adam, but was unable to locate him. Her panic increased in intensity with every second that went by. She asked the store staff to shout his name over the loudspeakers in a last-ditch effort to find him, hoping that if Adam heard it, he would come back to her. She kept searching the store, calling out his name and searching every hallway in the hopes of finding him while she awaited a response. She happened to run into Jean, her mother-in-law, who volunteered to assist in finding Adam right away. They searched the store together, asking staff and other customers if they had seen him. But after searching for more than 90 minutes, and calling on Adam several times without finding him, Rev realized that time was of the essence. She had a growing fear in her heart that something horrible had occurred. She made the difficult choice to call the Hollywood police at 1:55 p.m. with a heavy heart and a sense of urgency. She had no idea that her worst nightmare was going to come true. A massive search for her son was launched in response to this call, with ground crews searching the area for any hints and helicopters hovering overhead. A horrifying find was made in a drainage canal next to the Florida Turnpike, close to Vero Beach, on August 10. On closer examination, two fishermen saw what appeared to be the head of a baby doll floating in the water, but it turned out to be a child's detached head. They called the police right away, horrified. The Indian River County Sheriff's Office sent Detective Ralphie Latimer Jr. and a deputy to the scene to conduct an investigation. Regretfully, no additional remains were discovered during the canal search conducted by divers from Indian River County and St. Lucie County. Adam's parents, meanwhile, continued to hope that their son was still alive. They were left to look for him by themselves, heartbroken and feeling totally powerless. The FBI's National Crime Database at the time allowed reports of stolen vehicles including horses, but there was no mechanism in place for missing children. Because of this, law enforcement was unable to communicate important details about missing children, giving the impression that Adam might be anywhere. Adam's parents made a public plea for their son's safe return on the Good Morning America television show on the morning of August 11th. In the hopes that their message would strike a chord with viewers and inspire anyone with information to come forward, they shared their anguish and desperation. Additionally, they promised a $100,000 reward for any leads that could lead to Adam's location. This outreach emphasized the gravity and urgency of the situation and was a component of their attempt to engage the community in the search. The medical examination was essential in identifying the recovered remains as the investigation progressed. Adam's dental chart and the severed head discovered in the canal were thoroughly examined by the coroner's office. One notable similarity that emerged from this comparison was a filling on the cheek side of a lower left molar. This distinctive dental feature verified that the remains were, in fact, those of Adam Walsh. The coroner then conducted an autopsy to ascertain the cause of death. Adam had died from asphyxiation, according to the examination, which indicated a lack of oxygen because of an obstruction of the airway. This suggested that the act was violent and planned. In addition, the condition of his remains indicated that Adam had most likely passed away a few days prior to his head being found. Adam's death was officially declared a homicide by the coroner, which horribly confirmed the worst suspicions. Despite thorough searches of the canal and the surrounding areas, the remainder of Adam's body was never found, which presented a major challenge to the investigation. The nation was shocked when Adam's head was found 130 miles from his Hollywood home. People were saddened and deeply disturbed by the heinous crime. The way the Hollywood Police Department conducted the investigation into their son's disappearance infuriated John and Reeve Walsh. They believed the case was not handled with the necessary urgency from the beginning, which resulted in a disjointed response that made them feel powerless. John took action to bring attention to Adam in those early days. He held press conferences, distributed flyers featuring Adam's photo, and contacted the local media to request information. In addition to finding Adam, they wanted to force a more exhaustive police investigation. They argued for a thorough investigation of every lead during their meetings with law enforcement. They persisted in trying, but the police's lack of cooperation demoralized them more and more. John became a vocal critic of the investigation as a result of his frustration, which eventually influenced his subsequent public policy work. Their message was further amplified by John Walsh's hosting of the 1988 premiere of the television program America's Most Wanted. The program developed into a potent vehicle for bringing attention to wanted criminals and missing children, in order to encourage viewers to pay attention and report any information they may have. Each episode included segments on current missing child cases. In addition to educating the public about the realities of child abduction, the series gave law enforcement a way to ask for community assistance. The life of convicted serial killer Otis Elwood Toole was filled with violence, abuse, and chaos. Toole was born in Jacksonville, Florida, on March 5, 1947. His early years were characterized by an abusive mother who dressed him in girl clothes and called him Susan, an alcoholic father who abandoned him, and a maternal grandmother who exposed him to satanic rituals and practices. His older sister and a neighbor next door were among the many family members and acquaintances who sexually assaulted him. With an IQ of 75, Toole was categorized as having mildly disabled intellectual capacity. Due to his epilepsy, he frequently had grand mal seizures. Toole visited gay bars and became a prostitute as a teenager. At the age of 14, he allegedly committed his first murder in 1961 after being coerced into having sex by a traveling salesman. In the 9th grade, Toole left school and started living on the streets of the southwestern United States, earning a living through panhandling and prostitution. Toole, then 17 years old, was arrested for loitering in August 1965. Although there is little evidence of his activities after this arrest, authorities believe he drifted around the southwestern United States between 1966 and 1973, making a living through panhandling and prostitution. Toole was implicated in the 1974 murder of Patricia Webb, a 24-year-old woman in Nebraska. He left Nebraska shortly after and briefly made Boulder, Colorado, his home. His stay was brief, though, as he quickly emerged as a leading suspect in the October 14, 1974 murder of 31-year-old Ellen Holman. Toole's private life was a mystery in the years that followed. He hitched a ride in the American South and drifted back to Jacksonville in early 1975 D. Toole married a woman 25 years his senior on January 14, 1976. But their marriage didn't last long. When his wife found out he was gay, she left him 3 days later. Later on, Toole disclosed that his marriage was an attempt to conceal his actual sexual orientation. Toole was taken into custody for an unrelated arson incident in April 1983, while George Sonnenberg, 65, was inside his house. He had set it on fire. For the horrifying arson attack, Toole was taken into custody, admitted to the crime, and was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Toole, however, stated at his trial for killing George Sonnenberg that he only signed the confession to be sent back to Jacksonville and did not set the house on fire. He was given a death sentence for first-degree murder, but it was later reduced to life in prison. Toole, who was already serving a prison sentence for 2 unconnected killings, shockingly admitted to killing Adam Walsh on October 21, 1983. John Walsh, Adam's father, was convinced that Toole had committed the crime despite the lack of hard proof. According to Toole, he promised Adam candy and toys to entice him into his white 1971 Cadillac sedan DeVille, which had a noticeable dent on the right bumper. At first, Toole said Adam was quiet and cooperative as they traveled north on Interstate 95 toward Jacksonville, but as time went on, Adam started to get anxious. In a shocking development, Toole said he struck Adam in the face. He claimed that when things became more heated, he hit Adam once more, knocking him out. Toole continued north on the Florida Turnpike to an abandoned service road north of the Raid Bar Road overpass in northwest St. Lucie County while Adam was hurt. Toole used his car's seatbelt to strangle Adam to death after realizing he was still alive. He then allegedly used a hatchet to decapitate Adam after dragging his lifeless body out of the car. Toole later stated that he destroyed Adam's remains in an old refrigerator as part of his disposal process. He claimed he wanted to adopt Adam after he got back to Jacksonville, but that plan wasn't seen as feasible. The blood-stained carpet from the car, the hatchet allegedly used in the murder, and eventually the car itself were among the important pieces of evidence that police lost during the course of the investigation. This evidence loss was a major blow to the investigation. However, Toole was never formally charged or found guilty of Adam's murder because there was not enough tangible evidence. Toole initially admitted to the crime, but later recanted his admission, casting doubt on the case. In addition to depriving Adam's family of the justice they were entitled to, this lack of accountability also raised grave questions regarding the efficiency of the investigation and the handling of evidence in such dire circumstances. There are serious concerns regarding Otis Toole's possible involvement, because multiple witnesses located him in the Hollywood region in the days preceding Adam's disappearance. Toole, who was serving a life sentence for other offenses, passed away in prison in September 1996 at the age of 49 from cirrhosis after a long and difficult life. According to his niece, he confessed to Adam's murder on his deathbed after he passed away. On October 10, 1983, the television movie Adam, which told the tragic tale of Adam Walsh's kidnapping and murder, debuted. When it first aired, it attracted 38 million viewers and significantly increased public awareness of child abduction. In 1983, 1984, and 1985, each broadcast included a hotline for tips along with images and descriptions of missing children. 13 of the 55 children who were highlighted were able to recover successfully as a result of this initiative. The American rapper Busy Bone was reunited with his mother after a babysitter recognized his photo during the broadcast, making it a noteworthy case. The Walsh family changed the way society views missing children by using Adam to transform their tragedy into a potent advocacy tool. Additionally, in 1984, the U.S. John and Reeve Walsh, along with other parents of missing children, tirelessly lobbied Congress to pass the Missing Children's Assistance Act. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCEMEC, an organization devoted to offering resources, support, and advocacy for missing children and their families, was made possible by this important legislation. The act sought to strengthen the response to kidnappings of children and guarantee that law enforcement had the resources and direction required to successfully handle these tragic situations. After John Walsh's book was published, Hollywood Police Chief Rick Stone conducted a thorough review in 1997 which sparked a renewed effort to look into Adam's case. Prior to being named Hollywood's chief of police the year before, Stone had 22 years of law enforcement experience, having worked for the Dallas, Texas, and Wichita, Kansas departments. Stone carefully examined the evidence, even going back to Toole's recorded interrogations by Hollywood detective Mark Smith, even though the crime had taken place 16 years prior. After reviewing, Stone came to the conclusion that Toole had killed Adam with proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Toole and Henry Lee Lucas, his partner, had admitted to or linked themselves to over 200 murders, many of which turned out to be untrue. The majority of Lucas's confessions were actually discovered to have been forced by the police, which further calls into question the veracity of Toole's statements. After Adam Walsh's father called the America's Most Wanted hotline to voice concerns about his son's pedophilia, Jeffrey Dahmer was named as a suspect in the case in 2007. At the time of Adam's kidnapping, Dahmer had resided in Miami Beach, which is close to Hollywood. Both recognized Dahmer from pictures following his arrest, and witnesses claim to have seen a suspicious young blonde man at the Hollywood Mall on the day Adam vanished. Furthermore, just before Adam's severed head was found, a truck driver claimed to have seen a man driving a blue van close to a canal. However, police rejected his account. John Walsh voiced doubts about any link between Dahmer and the murder of his son, pointing to a dearth of evidence, even though Dahmer denied any involvement in Adam's case. Due to his 2-week absence from home in 1981 and the installation of a new seat cover in his vehicle soon after Adam's disappearance, Edward James, another suspect, sparked suspicions. Investigators cleared him after a voice stress analysis revealed no deceit. Only incomplete dental records were used to identify the child, and there was no autopsy report. Even though the Walsh family acknowledged Otis Toole's guilt, these unanswered questions cast doubt on the case's legacy. With John Walsh at his side, Hollywood Police Chief Chad Wagner declared the case closed on December 16, 2008. The police came to the conclusion that Otis Toole was the murderer following an outside review. Following Adam's tragic story, legislative efforts kept changing. On July 25, 2006, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act was passed by President George W. Bush, who signed it into law a few days later. This historic act strengthened punishments for violent crimes against children, put policies in place to prevent human trafficking, and created a national database for convicted juvenile offenders. The Adam Walsh Reauthorization Act, which was introduced in 2016, made sure that programs established under the 2006 Act had the money they needed to continue their essential work. This law, which was a part of the Survivors' Bill of Rights, demonstrated a strong dedication to protecting children. Even though Adam Walsh's passing is a tragic chapter in American history, his narrative has sparked important change. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The police didn't know they were entering a house of horrors when they started looking into a murder case on February 16, 1981. There was something really strange about the house. The nightmare that started inside those walls, however, would not stay contained. Indeed, it was on the verge of seeping into reality. Although the nation would be shocked by Alan Bono's murder in Connecticut, Arnie Cheyenne Johnson's terrifying allegation of demonic possession would garner the most media attention. Supported by Ed and Lorraine Warren, paranormal investigators, this case was unheard of. But were the demons inside, or the supernatural really to blame? Many believe David was just suffering from a mental illness. The true crime behind the film, The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, is presented to you this Halloween. The first illegal killing in Brookfield's history had occurred on the evening of February 16, 1981. With dense woods on either side, Brookfield Police Department Sergeant Gordon Fairchild slowed his patrol car when he saw a man stumbling down the road. The figure looked confused, as if intoxicated, and his appearance suggested a straightforward case of public intoxication. One particular detail, however, would lead to the most contentious case of the decade. tiny blood droplets were scattered all over the man's clothing. He didn't appear to be in a state to describe the bloodstains or his location. He admitted to the officer that he had a drinking problem and needed assistance. The man was captured by Fairchild, who escorted him back to the cruiser. The sergeant didn't know the man, but that night would be the beginning of the most bizarre case he would ever work on, one that would ultimately rock the foundations of the American legal system. A call came in as he was getting the man settled in the car. 2 miles away, a horrific murder had been attempted. According to reports, the suspect had escaped into the woods. Detective Fairchild knew then that the man they were searching for was Arn Cheyenne Johnson, who was seated next to him. They took him in to question him. Investigating the horrifying murder attempt further, they found that Alan Bono, 40, was lying in a pool of his own blood. A 5-inch knife had stabbed him several times in a gory manner. One of the stab wounds extended from his stomach to the base of his heart, which made the situation worse. The autopsy had completed the case, the fingerprints on the knife had been positively identified, and there were eyewitnesses to the assault. The proof was unquestionable. Investigators were certain that Alan Bono was murdered by Arn Cheyenne Johnson. However, it was the why, the reason for the action, that would transform this otherwise straightforward case into a riddle that defied reason and has sparked debate to this day. Alan, the victim, was still receiving medical attention at a hospital on the day Arne was captured. Arne was told that he would now face murder charges after Alan passed away from his injuries. Arne's unexpected reaction was to take a 25-minute power nap. Police Detective Sergeant John Lucas formally charged him with first-degree murder after reading him his rights when he awoke. Arn's only response during the interrogation was that he had no memory of the murder's time and that he didn't intend to harm anyone. Before the murder, he last recalled being out to lunch with his landlord Alan Bono with his wife Debbie Glatzel, her cousin Mary, and his own sister Wanda Johnson. His memory went blank after that. Debbie, Arn's wife, was called in to answer questions about what happened that day and to fill in the blanks her husband had left. The detectives had no idea that her story would lead to a barrage of the strangest explanations they had ever heard during questioning. She started by giving a description of the deceased, Alan Bono, an Australian who had offered Debbie a job and rented his house to them. For the young couple, he was more of a friend than a landlord or boss. The beginning of that afternoon was pleasant, full of laughter and family, but Alan's attitude changed as he drank too much. In addition to taunting Arn about a sinister past that had been buried but was now resurfacing, he started making offensive comments about the girls. Alan kept pushing Arn's buttons, but there was something about his past that disturbed him, something so sinister. Alan provoked Arn more and more with each taunt until he lost control and got to his feet. But there was a problem. A low, guttural sound escaped Arn's throat as his body tensed and his expression twisted. He was growling, not just angry. It became evident that a physical altercation was unavoidable, despite Wanda, Mary, and Debbie's best efforts to diffuse the mounting tension. Wanda flung herself between the two men, but Arn suddenly produced a knife, and the women watched in horror as what transpired. As though possessed, Arn repeatedly and wildly stabbed Alan until he was lying in a pool of blood. Then Arn suddenly jerked to her feet and fled. Debbie said it wasn't just different from Arn. It wasn't Arn at all. He wasn't acting alone, supposedly. During this strange interrogation, renowned paranormal investigator Lorraine Warren called the Brookfield police station because they believed that an outside force, which they dubbed the Beast, was silently pulling the strings. She was going to say something so out of the ordinary that it would make the case even stranger. It was a malicious demon within Arn, she thought, and he was innocent. Despite the fact that the detectives clearly didn't believe her, she persisted and requested that they look over their earlier records. The police were astounded by what they saw when they examined the documents from a few months prior. Lorraine had called, and she had already told the detectives that a murder like this one was bound to happen. Neither Ed Warren nor Lorraine Warren had attained their later prominence at this point. However, it was becoming evident that Debbie and Arne had a strong ally in the Warrens, who were willing to support their bizarre allegations with their contentious knowledge, if they were lying to get away with murder. If there was a demon, why would it attack Alan? How could he have caused such a violent reaction? The demon that lived in Arn allegedly took control and showed Alan where he belonged because Alan had constantly made fun of and taunted him. Lorraine implied that the demon had a purpose and was connected to something much more profound than just a random force. She claimed that the solution was found in the troubled past of Debbie's family, which included not only the Warrens, but also her brother David Glatzel, who was 11 years old. The clock was running out as the investigators got ready to delve into this sinister past, and the story was only going to get stranger by the second. The realities that awaited them were more horrifying than their worst fears. It started in Bridgeport, Connecticut, during the summer of 1980. Arn and young Debbie were searching for rental properties to move in together after becoming engaged. At that point, they discovered a house close to a well. They made the decision to move in since the house was roomy and better than others in their price range. Debbie's family provided assistance with the move. However, their idyllic reality would soon be shattered by the dream home. David, Debbie's younger brother, had been asked to sweep the master bedroom, but after a while she discovered him outside in the yard, clearly shaken. He insisted on going home without cleaning the room. Debbie gave the assignment to her older brother Alan after realizing something was amiss. However, Alan also felt uneasy shortly after beginning and promptly requested to leave. During dinner at their mother's house that evening, David and Alan both related disturbing tales about what had happened to them that day. These tales would soon be woven into something much darker. David said a man shoved him back onto the bed and threatened to hurt him and his family. Alan said he had had a similar experience. The door suddenly slammed shut in his face as he felt a ghostly presence watching him. The family believed in the supernatural and was very religious. They were therefore certain that the house was haunted. They started looking for other options after giving up the rental property. The family's encounters with the paranormal did not end there, though. David started exhibiting alarming symptoms of an unidentified cause right away. He frequently communicated the beast's messages to the family because he thought he could hear it in his ears. He thought the beast had come through the storage beneath the house and was at their door one day. Each of these incidents then added to the others, and the family was unable to turn back. David claimed to have had the impression that someone was following or watching him. He was terrified and unable to sleep as a result of his intense nightmares, which were full of images of hideous people. Family members started to see David's distress firsthand. Some reported that he would speak in deep, strange voices or show unusual strength. David's family sought assistance from famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren after realizing how serious the situation was. Famous for their work on a number of haunting cases, the Warrens thought David was under demonic possession. They documented the strange events through a series of investigations and interviews with the Glatzel family. David reportedly had violent outbursts during one particularly intense session, claiming that a malevolent entity was torturing him. The Warrens thought that this ghost had taken hold of David and was attacking him physically and mentally. The Warrens and a number of priests performed several exorcisms at the Glatzel residence in an effort to rid David of the alleged demon. David frequently screamed, convulsed, and displayed strange behaviors during the rituals, making these sessions tense and frightening. The Warrens claimed that David's suffering was so intense that he would physically attack family members and anyone else who was around when the exorcisms were taking place. During these sessions, the exorcists claimed to have seen odd things like moving objects, cold spots in the room, and a sense of an oppressive presence. David claimed to have overheard voices mocking him during this period, claiming that he was helpless and would never be able to escape its hold. The young child suffered a severe psychological injury, becoming scared and perplexed, and frequently doubting his own reality. Following months of suffering and several unsuccessful attempts, a team of priests, assisted by Ed and Lorraine Warren, performed David Glatzel's last exorcism. Among the rituals carried out, this exorcism is frequently characterized as the most severe and hazardous. David's behavior peaked in a terrifying way during the session. It was reported that his voice sounded unnaturally guttural. "You are repulsed by Jesus," the priests chanted, "Leave this child alone." Those involved claimed that David had demonstrated supernatural strength well beyond his physical capabilities and had levitated off his bed. Following what felt like hours of fervent spiritual struggle, David's condition abruptly changed. His body, which had been stiff and tense during the exorcism, began to loosen up. David was calm for the first time in months, as his screams stopped. The priests and the Warrens thought that the demon had finally been expelled at this point. David didn't display the violent and unpredictable behavior he had previously displayed. Instead, he looked tired but lucid. Witnesses to his ordeal, his family described the moment as a relief, a weight being taken off their lives and their home. Nevertheless, although the exorcism was terminated, the demon continued to exist. Everything would be completely upended at this point. Here, the startling link between Arn and the eerie case of demonic possession started to emerge, exposing facts that nobody could have predicted. Ed and Lorraine Warren, as well as the Glatzel family, said that Arn had grown impatient with the demon's seeming control over David. During one of the exorcism sessions, Arn confronted the entity thought to be torturing David in a show of defiance and concern. He yelled at the demon, demanding that it abandon David and take possession of him instead. They said, "Take me on," Arn said. "If you're so strong, leave David alone and come into me." These words were meant to be a taunt, challenging the evil force to target him instead of young David. This challenge that Arnie presented to the demon deeply troubled Lorraine. She thought a horrible thing might happen, so she called the Brookfield police to express her fear that something terrible was going to happen. And it did. As events transpired, investigators were certain that Arnie and his followers had a story that was both frightening and humorous, but unquestionably implausible. From the investigators' point of view, the day's events were simple. After consuming excessive amounts of alcohol, Arn and Alan ended up with young girls. Alan's offensive comment about Arn's sister-in-law pushed Arn over the edge, escalating the tension. Under the influence of alcohol and his tumultuous past with the Glatzel family, Arn either lost his mind or used this as an easy excuse to confront Alan physically before leaving. The charges against him were based on this. However, what would Arn's defense entail? Did he have a crime? He would make a plea that would catch the attention of everyone on the planet, not just one of simple guilt. Ed and Lorraine Warren said during the trial, which started in October 1981, "We're going to take the devil to court." Martin Minella, Arn's defense lawyer, claimed that because Arn was under the influence of a demon at the time of the murder, he was not accountable for his actions. Such a defense was employed for the first time in American history. Minella attempted to have the Warrens testify regarding the alleged possession by Johnson and the exorcisms. Additionally, he intended to subpoena the priests who were performing the exorcisms. The defense team maintained that Arnie's actions could only be explained by demonic influence. However, the defense of demonic possession was promptly dismissed by the case's presiding judge, Judge Robert Callahan. Because it was not verifiable by any legal or scientific standards, he decided that such a defense could not be used in court. Supernatural claims are not admissible under the American legal system, which is founded on observable facts and logical reasoning. After the demonic possession defense was rejected, Arn's legal team turned to self-defense. Judge Callahan said, "The courts have dealt with the existence of God. Now they're going to have to deal with the existence of the devil." The next question on the trial was whether Arnie had acted in self-defense during an altercation with Alan Bono while intoxicated. According to testimony given during the trial, Alan started the deadly altercation by grabbing Mary Glatzel, the sister of Arnie's girlfriend, and refusing to let her go. Although the specifics of the altercation were unclear, witnesses stated that Alan had been drinking excessively and had become agitated. Assistant State's Attorney Walter Flanagan led the prosecution's argument that Arn stabbed Alan on purpose. Although the prosecution argued that the murder was the consequence of a heated argument rather than any supernatural influence, Johnson had a history of good behavior and no violent tendencies. The jury deliberated based on the evidence presented in court, despite the case's sensational nature and the initial defense's reliance on the demonic possession argument. On November 24, 1981, the jury found Arn Johnson guilty of first-degree manslaughter. Following 15 hours of deliberation, the jury agreed with the defense's arguments of mitigating circumstances, such as the fight between Arnie and Alan, and rejected the notion that the murder was premeditated or that Johnson had acted with malice aforethought. Due to his good behavior, Arnie was released from prison in 1986 after serving only 5 of the 10 to 20 years that he had been sentenced to. The case has had a long-lasting impact on popular culture, In addition to the legal field, its status in paranormal lore has been solidified by Ed and Lorraine Warren's involvement with the case. Standing by their assertions that Arne Johnson had been influenced by a malevolent force and that the devil was the one who forced him to do it, they continued to write books and give interviews. The case further cemented its place in the history of the paranormal in America when it was dramatized in the popular movie The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, in 2021. As a result, the February 16, 1981 case, which was initially thought to be an open and shut case, has been a source of fascination and wonder for many years, and is still one of the most fascinating cases to be remembered on Halloween. Why did the demon, if it was responsible, attach itself to David in spite of multiple exorcisms, but lay dormant in Arne both before and after the murder? Did Arne get away with the most egregious excuse in criminal history? How did Lorraine Warren alert the Brookfield police prior to the actual murder, if it wasn't paranormal? Those who read this terrifying story are still plagued by these questions. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Arthur Labanjo Hughes, then 7 years old, would give up on life at this very moment. 5 hours later, the world would hear the most tragic story on the internet, that of Arthur Labanjo Hughes, after an emergency 999 call was placed. He was discovered in a state that could not be explained by a fall, even though he had fallen and struck his head. He was remembered for his superpower, his smile. If one could ask for one last thing, despite having numerous guardian angels around him, Arthur was imprisoned by pure evil during COVID-19 and spent every day of his life in hell. Soon, the Midlands, England Police Department would find horrifying hidden footage and videos that they would prefer not to view. June 17, 2020 was the date of the call. The voice on the line was panicked. 6-year-old Arthur Labanjo Hughes had fallen down the stairs. When paramedics arrived, he was having trouble breathing. Arthur's life slipped away in spite of all the attempts to save him. Before the doctors noticed something that would haunt them for years, it appeared to be a tragic accident. Horrible injuries were found, which contradicted the caller's account. Arthur's severe brain injuries had caused his death. According to the doctors, the damage was comparable to an automobile accident. Even the on-scene paramedics observed numerous bruises on his body, in addition to severe head trauma. Amidst the frantic words and background noise of the 999 call, the truth was concealed in plain sight. Everyone would be shocked to learn the true story of Arthur's tragic demise when the recording was played again, this time with more discerning ears and a greater sense of suspicion. Something much darker now echoed what had once seemed like desperation. Emma Tustin, 32, the stepmother and caregiver of 6-year-old Arthur Labanjo Hughes, was the female voice on the call. Emma was the only person who saw Arthur's final moments because his father, 29-year-old Thomas Hughes, was not there when the alleged accident happened. She was also the one who explained how Arthur got hurt and escorted him to the hospital. However, there was a problem with the doctors. They called the police because of their suspicions, and detectives soon began requesting Emma's first formal statement. The thinking step was the punishment area that Arthur's stepmother Emma and father Thomas had created for him. He could stand there and think about what he had done. Because of his actions, Arthur often found himself there, Emma said. However, Arthur was particularly impolite and violent on the night of June 17, 2020, the day he passed away. Emma started crying as she described the mischievous child who had mistreated her. She asserted, like many other stepmothers, that her love was not returned. However, the narrative did not match Emma's story, which remained mostly unchanged from the details in the 999 call. Although more research was necessary, the results would reveal a disturbing truth that would haunt the investigators for the rest of their careers. By 1 a.m., Arthur was placed on life support. After determining that there was nothing more that could be done, life support was turned off the next day. A forensic analysis conducted as the investigation progressed showed that Arthur had more than 130 distinct wounds, from head to toe, in varying stages of recovery. Each and every part of his small body was injured and bruised. Long-term physical stress caused his thymus gland and one kidney to shrink significantly. However, a total detachment of the retina in his right eye and bleeding on the brain were the cause of death. The experts had no idea that this was only the beginning. He had extremely high sodium levels when he was first brought to the hospital. These levels did not change 7 hours later, suggesting that his body was unable to adequately absorb the excess salt he had consumed. According to estimates, Arthur would have needed to eat 6 tablespoons of salt in a single day, or more likely, be poisoned with high amounts of salt over a number of days to reach such sodium levels. Torture was evident from the autopsy report and the injuries sustained. However, that wasn't even the reason this case was the most well-known in Middleton. It was the horrifying findings that had not yet been made during the inquiry that had the public's attention like a wildfire. Authorities were tracking down the sadistic monster who had committed the unthinkable after discovering the unspeakable horror inflicted upon the defenseless child. Behind the story of the tearful Emma and the restless Thomas, there was little question that something was amiss. Across the nation, rumors were circulating, but it quickly became clear that these were more than just conjectures. Discovering the atrocities that had taken place behind the scenes was the difficult part. A search warrant for Emma's 2-bedroom home, where she lived with her boyfriend Thomas Hughes and their children from prior marriages, was swiftly obtained by the Middleton police. Apart from a CCTV camera placed in the living room, nothing seemed especially noteworthy at first glance. Investigators were informed by Emma and Thomas that it was done to keep an eye on Arthur and make sure he didn't hurt himself. The investigators were unaware that the recordings held terrible secrets they would have preferred to ignore when they took them for additional analysis. Heartbreaking details of little Arthur's last hours were captured on CCTV, including scenes that would have horrified anyone who saw them. This unsettling video was captured just a few hours prior to Arthur's purported mishap. Arthur pleaded with Blake to come and save his life. Who were these individuals that Arthur was depending on in the final stages of his life? Blake was Thomas Hughes's brother and Arthur's uncle. When Arthur called for his family outside of Emma and Thomas, he was seen to be weak, frail, and hardly standing. Detectives contacted Arthur's grandparents and Uncle Blake during the hours that these recordings were being examined. In addition to being open, the family had a lot to share. The date of Arthur's birth was January 4, 2014. He was among the happiest kids you could ever meet just a year ago. He was a huge supporter of Birmingham City Football Club and loved superheroes. Those who knew him said he was intelligent and vivacious, but as the grandparents dug deeper, it became evident that Arthur was a contented but unlucky child. Thomas and Olivia Labagno-Halcrow, who met while engaging in drug activities, are his parents. Olivia entered a new toxic relationship with Arthur after the parents divorced, but Arthur stayed with her. She had taken an alcohol awareness course and met a man named Gary Cunningham. Gary and Olivia both used violence against one another. In February 2019, this toxic relationship tragically came to a head when Olivia killed Gary by stabbing him 12 times while intoxicated. The fact that young Arthur saw the murder was the most startling aspect of this incident. Olivia received an 11-year sentence in 2020. Little Arthur moved in with his father, Thomas, and grandparents while the mother was serving her sentence. His grandparents and his Uncle Blake were the main sources of the love he had experienced. For Arthur, this was the safest period of his life. The trail of misfortune started with a simple date, but the wave of good times would soon subside. Thomas, his father, went on a date with Emma Tustin, a woman he had met online. Detectives discovered that Emma had a history of unpredictable and attention-seeking behavior as the investigation progressed. When her boyfriend threatened to break up with her in 2013, she leaped from the top of a multi-story parking structure. She once threw herself out of a bedroom window to stop her partner and his best friend from going to the pub. In an interview with the Daily Mail, one of her ex-boyfriends stated, "She's a black widow. Every man she hangs out with is sucked dry by her. She has absolutely no maternal instinct. She wanted children because of the attention they gave her as a newborn and the benefits they provided. But she didn't want to know once the attention stopped and she was left alone with a baby." She was also accused of being a careless mother, and social services frequently visited her home. The ultimate application of this woman's evil would be when she entered Thomas's, and eventually Arthur's, life. Thomas wasn't a perfect father, but he wasn't a total nightmare either. But as he and Emma became closer, that would soon change, and Arthur would lose his father in a way he never could have predicted. Arthur went on a number of excursions with his father and Emma, but each time he came back, the grandparents noticed that he was becoming less and less eager to accompany them. He couldn't quite understand the unnerving tension that was replacing the warmth of family. His grandparents claimed that they became aware that something was amiss in their own house. Every time Emma came to visit, Arthur would try to hide because he was afraid of her. She was disliked by Thomas's brother and parents as well, who perceived dishonesty and disdain in her. They were unable to foresee the scope of what was happening, though. When Arthur's grandmother tried to buy him a Subway sandwich during one of Emma's visits, Emma yelled at her to stop feeding him, saying it was a needless luxury. This brief interaction acted as a warning, demonstrating Emma's ease and eagerness to make choices regarding Arthur's life. She wasn't alone, though. Thomas was also acting differently. He had started to become easily agitated. Blake saw the young boy staring blankly at the wall when Thomas, for a child, it was an unusual sight. Blake tried to give him a snack to lift his spirits, but Thomas stepped in and said Arthur was being punished and shouldn't be fed. As the pandemic spread, this was only the start of a nightmare that would only get worse. A total lockdown was proclaimed by the Prime Minister. Arthur had the danger in his own house while others hunkered down to protect themselves. Separated from his cherished grandparents, he was raised by his father, Thomas, and Emma, and saw them infrequently. Things were gradually coming together for Arthur's decline. Arthur's grandmother saw a blue bruise on his shoulder during one lockdown. She took prompt action and lodged a complaint with social services, even though she was Thomas's mother. When Arthur got back to Emma and Thomas's house the next day, a social services agent called Emma and paid her a visit. But nothing was done about it. They insisted that Arthur and Emma's other two children looked content and healthy, and they denied that there was any bruise. But the call prior to the visit was sufficient justification for Emma to be on guard and take the required precautions to hide it, according to the grandmother. Blake tried to get in touch with the Middleton police, but sadly the officers never got through to Arthur because they believed social services was handling the case. The family made repeated attempts to enlist assistance for Arthur, but there would be no outcome. Arthur was suffering terribly, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Meanwhile, Arthur's death was being investigated more thoroughly. Though they were unsure of what might have caused Arthur's death, Arthur's grandparents and family blamed Emma and Thomas. The couple was the subject of a more thorough investigation, and the most repulsive information began to come to light. After seizing their phones, investigators started going through the data. They found shocking information in the audio recordings and text messages between Emma and Thomas. The weight of what had been concealed behind closed doors became painfully evident with every new line that appeared on the screen. Emma and Thomas's messages exposed the depth of their perverse collaboration, and they were complicit in this nightmare. The messages described Arthur's living conditions, which included physical abuse, loneliness, and hunger. Emma vented her frustrations and documented her increasing cruelty towards the boy in the majority of these texts. She punished Arthur by depriving him of food and liquids and making him stand in the hallway for hours on end. The young boy's pleas for sustenance and solace were ridiculed. He referred to his desperation as misbehavior. For Emma and Thomas, the conversations were a perverse kind of reinforcement in these messages. When Thomas wasn't home, she would frequently record Arthur's anguished cries and send Thomas audio snippets, seemingly to get his approval for her severe treatment. Thomas would reply by expressing his own annoyance with Arthur and urging her to be even harsher, telling her to just end him or recommending violent means to stop his screams. The boy was left to suffer alone in his room or cry himself hoarse in the hallway while the couple, at times, were only a few feet away from Arthur and texted, their phones buzzing with nasty conversations. Emma complained that Arthur was acting out or spoiling him because of his need for affection. Emma and Thomas talked about how Arthur should be disciplined for small transgressions or denied certain foods. Neglect was not the only form of abuse. There were numerous instances of name-calling and verbal abuse in these messages. Both sides' hatred was clearly visible in these messages. The messages made it abundantly evident that there was physical torture and intimidation in the home. Arthur had been attacked several times. According to one of the messages, Emma and Thomas had a falling out, and Emma said she could accept Thomas but not Arthur. In a stern reply, Thomas insisted that she would have to take Arthur and him together or not at all. Since Emma's rejection of Arthur only made Thomas more irate, this exchange exposed the problematic dynamics of their relationship. This tension suggested that Thomas's rage could quickly grow and result in more abuse of Arthur. One thing was certain, despite the numerous questions, Arthur was leading a miserable life and frequently going without food. For the investigators, one CCTV clip that had previously seemed unimportant took on new significance. On one of the hottest days of the year, the video showed Thomas and Emma lounging and eating ice cream. Arthur, meanwhile, was made to stand on the stairs, hot and hungry, without water, and in a bulky onesie that made him feel even more uncomfortable. Emma stooped to eat McDonald's in front of a starving Arthur, who was left defenseless in the hallway, while Thomas sat cross-legged. The question came up. Did Emma's children all experience the same level of suffering? The investigators learned from Arthur's grandparents that Emma's children were frequently abandoned and left hungry for extended periods of time, while Emma remained in her room. But Arthur's ordeal was particularly horrifying. Emma's children didn't seem to experience the same degree of abuse as Arthur in any of the video. Subsequently, Emma's kids would inform investigators that if they attempted to assist Arthur, they would also be punished. As another heartbreaking clip awaited their review, the unsettling details of this case seemed to go on forever. Arthur was seen standing and shuffle-footing in these clips. It appeared innocuous at first, until they discovered he had been upright for as long as 14 hours. Police clamped down on Thomas and Emma as the horrific details surfaced, interrogating them about Arthur and the devastating information in the recordings. The details of Thomas and Emma's accident story started to shift piece by piece, but Thomas would be the first to reveal the truth, which was even more terrifying than they already knew. Thomas admitted to them that his punishment of Arthur might have been excessive. He explained to the investigators that Emma and the family suffered as a result of Arthur's behavioral problems. Thomas was going to disclose that he had studied torture techniques used during interrogation, techniques that caused the most pain without leaving scars or bruises. Even though it was difficult to comprehend what offense a 6-year-old could have committed to warrant such a punishment, what actually took place on June 17, 2020 then? But did Arthur's body simply give up after all this suffering? No. The case's reality was straightforward and cruel. In fact, the reality was even more horrible. Arthur was left behind as usual, weak and starved, while Thomas had gone to the grocery store with Emma's kids. Emma texted Thomas that Arthur was causing trouble and instructed her to discipline him, even though Arthur couldn't have done anything that she couldn't manage on her own. In a matter of hours, Emma made the decision to act independently and guided Arthur to his demise. Emma repeatedly slammed Arthur's head against the wall, knocking him out by the time Thomas got back. After several unsuccessful attempts to get Arthur to get up, Emma called 999 and told them that Arthur had beaten himself before falling. Thomas blatantly admitted to the investigators that he was to blame and that Emma ought to be released. He explained to them that Arthur died because he was unable to control him and was subsequently carried away. Emma wasn't at fault. From Middleton to Parliament, the unsettling case rocked the nation. The authorities eventually realized that Emma and Thomas had lied after Arthur died, and the injuries were obviously not self-inflicted. Both were taken into custody and accused of killing Arthur. At Emma's trial on December 3, 2021, the judge gave the following account of the deadly assault. You, Tustin, committed the last act of killing. You gave him a shake that caused his head to flex and become hyperextended on his neck while repeatedly striking it against the wall or the floor. Your degree of violence caused his body to be subjected to forces comparable to those involved in a high-speed traffic accident. Emma was found guilty of murder and given a life sentence with a minimum of 29 years in prison because of the severe and devastation of her injuries. Thomas Hughes, who did not witness the deadly assault, was convicted of manslaughter and given a 21-year prison term. It was announced in December 2020 that their sentences would be examined to determine whether they were excessively light, potentially resulting in longer terms for both. Only the two youngest of Emma's 4 children from prior relationships were still living with her when she first met Thomas. Emma had already been reported to social services multiple times by that point because of worries about the welfare of her children. But she had mastered the art of controlling these circumstances. She would use emotional strategies, crying and playing the victim whenever social services came to visit. The authorities would always depart without doing anything more. Although social services had always been mentioned in the story, their non-participation was an unexpected plot twist. How come Arthur's ongoing suffering went unnoticed despite social services getting involved in this case so early? How did social services contribute to Arthur's demise in your opinion? What, in your opinion, ought to have been done to save young Arthur from his cruel destiny? And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. One of the most terrifying scenes ever filmed is before you. Actual video of a serial killer on the loose. Because its owner was already being watched by the police, fate stepped in before the murder kit could take another life. From a sunny UK resort to a charming southern Italian town, he left a bloody trail in his wake. The criminal mastermind ridiculed the investigators and misled them by leaving obvious clues close to his victim. The man's bizarre fetish ultimately brought about his terrible demise, but it also motivated him to carry out unspeakably cruel deeds. Far from their busy hometown of Potenza, Italy, the Claps family was getting ready for a relaxing Sunday retreat at a small cottage in Tito on September 12, 1993. Luciano, their 20-year-old son, was with their parents, Antonio and Filomena. Gildo Claps, 24, their oldest son, and Elisa Claps, 16, their youngest daughter, were expected to arrive soon. Together with Elisa's friend Eliana D'Alessio, they were scheduled to arrive in the afternoon. Eliana and Elisa had decided to go to the town center church for a service. The girls then intended to head back to Elisa's house before having lunch at the cottage with the rest of the family. Gildo started to worry when the girls hadn't returned after an hour. His sister would call home if she was going to be late, and she was always on time. Eliana was the one who rang the doorbell. Eliana assumed her friend had already gone home after they parted ways at the church. The fact that Elisa was still missing shocked Eliana. Gildo wandered around the town center, worried, trying to find his sister. Elisa was not in the crowd of people that gathered around the church. The rest of the family returned to Potenza to inquire about the situation after Gildo and Elisa failed to show up by 2 p.m., and they were shocked to learn that the girl had disappeared. Gildo asked Eliana to describe his sister's precise morning movements. Eliana then admitted that she hadn't been entirely truthful. Elisa used the service as a pretext to meet with her friend, 21-year-old Danilo Restivo, a dental technician student, even though they didn't attend. Despite coming from a well-respected family, his father was the director of the local National Library branch. The young man was unpopular and frequently the object of jeering, particularly from girls. Being a good-hearted and sympathetic person, Elisa felt sorry for him, but she made it plain to him that they could not be together. However, he insisted on giving her a gift to celebrate her passing her exams, so she consented to meet him that day. Danilo and Elisa made plans to meet at the church as the service was coming to an end at 11:30 a.m. Eliana unintentionally ran into Angelica, another friend, while she was waiting outside. The girls thought they might have missed Elisa in the crowd, but they didn't see her leave the church. Gildo called Danilo's house and demanded an explanation because he was the last person to see his sister. According to Danilo, they sat at the altar and talked for 15 minutes during their meeting. Restivo stayed behind to pray after Elisa left the church, and that was the last time he saw her. After a few hours, Elisa didn't come home, so her brother Luciano went to see Restivo in person. Danilo's responses showed signs of nervousness and evasiveness. Luciano inquired as to what had happened after noticing a big bandage on his left hand. Restivo described how he cut his hand after tripping at a construction site. "I don't know where the girl is," he repeated. After Elisa's family called the police to report her missing, they asked that Restivo be questioned. However, their request was denied, and they were told to return home and wait for the girl to come back on her own. Gildo went back to the church because he had run out of options, but the door was locked. He made arrangements to enter and conducted another search of the building. He saw another locked door behind the altar, leading to the church's upper floor. When Gildo requested that door be opened as well, he was told that the priest, Father Domenico Sabbia, who had gone to a spa resort for a few days, was the only one with a key. When the police eventually spoke with Danilo 2 days later, after the girl had not returned, he stated that Elisa was unhappy at home and wanted to flee to Naples, but he attempted to talk her out of this plan. According to his version, he remained in the church while she left after their brief conversation. He said he asked her for advice about Paula, another girl he wanted to date, but he didn't mention the gift for Elisa. He returned home after the talk via a construction site where he had been with Paula just days before, where he had cut his hand after falling from an unfinished escalator. Investigators questioned whether Danilo was telling the truth. First of all, his statements were surprisingly accurate. Second, Elisa's desire to flee her devoted family was not supported by any evidence. Lastly, it was unclear how he fell head first from the escalator that was still under construction, only cutting his hand and avoiding breaking his glasses. When the police came to the Restivo's house, they asked to see the clothes their son was wearing that day, but without a warrant, Danilo's father wouldn't cooperate. Persuaded that Restivo was concealing something, the police checked his name in the database before leaving empty-handed. When he attacked other boys while playing with them at the age of 14, it turned out that he had already run afoul of the law. And it wasn't just that. 3 female students who lived close to his home accused him of stalking a few months ago. By calling girls at home and describing their attire, or playing them spooky music from the horror film Profondo Rosso, he obviously enjoyed making them feel afraid. Additionally, investigators learned that Danielo had a very peculiar habit. He enjoyed chopping off random people's hair while they were on public transit. Despite hearing about these incidents, the police were unable to establish Restivo. Meanwhile, word of Elisa Clapp's disappearance spread swiftly across the nation, and pranksters kept calling the family to say they had the girl and she was okay. While some of the messages claimed to have seen the girl in a white Fiat Uno, the police ignored the majority of these calls. The problem is that on that particular day, Elisa's friend Angelica disclosed that Ercilio Gegari, a 20-year-old admirer of hers, was out and about in the city center. Ercilio and his family had just arrived from Albania. Ercilio denied attending the church when he was asked to testify, and he gave the police the names of friends who could verify his alibi. But not only did his friends not believe his account, they also claimed that he was in the city center on the day the girl vanished. Additionally, one witness named Ercilio as the driver of a white Fiat Uno, which is the same model of vehicle that multiple witnesses reported seeing Elisa in on the day of her disappearance. When the police discovered Elisa's diary, which was missing several pages, suspicions of Ercilio's involvement increased. After reconstructing pieces of those pages, forensic specialists found that some words were written in Albanian. Ercilio was questioned again, and each time his account was altered. He once asserted that Danilo Restivo gave him instructions to deny knowing one another. Ercilio was eventually accused of providing false testimony. The police received an anonymous call in December. According to the female caller, she saw Elisa in Rome. Elisa had reportedly been assaulted and coerced into a white Fiat Uno. "Please help her and help me," the voice said toward the end of the call. The recorded call was analyzed and the results were shocking. Eliana was the caller. Because she was known to alter her version of events, investigators had long been suspicious of her statements. She was accused of providing false testimony, just like Ercilio. Detectives eventually concluded that Elisa was dead and that Danilo was to blame for her disappearance, even though they could not totally rule out the possibility that the girl had fled from home. He might have forced other people she knew to tell lies to the police, but they had nothing to accuse him or any other suspect of, other than false testimony in the absence of a body. However, the Claps family believed that powerful individuals, such as Danilo's father's friends and the priest of the church where she vanished, were defending the reputation of their daughter's murderer, even though all other churches were happy to have a box placed in the building where anyone could anonymously leave a note with information about Elisa. Father Domenico Sabbia, in particular, forbade anyone from entering the church's attic. He even made an effort to deny ever knowing Danilo, but this was swiftly refuted when a picture of the two of them together on Danilo's 18th birthday appeared. Danilo Restivo was eventually taken into custody for providing false testimony after all the information was gathered. He received a 20-month prison sentence after being found guilty. Gildo was astounded by the legal system after the trial, questioning how someone could be found guilty of providing false testimony and still not be forced to tell the whole truth. However, Danilo was released after serving half of his sentence. There was nothing else the police could accuse him of. Because Eliana and Ursi allegedly gave false testimony out of fear for their own lives, rather than to muddle the investigation, the judge did not find them guilty of perjury. Numerous rumors surfaced on the second anniversary of Elisa's disappearance in Potenza, including claims that she was being sold by human traffickers, was in the hands of the Sicilian mafia, or had a covert relationship with a priest. People who demanded money in exchange for information about the girl harassed the family on a regular basis. Elisa's family actively promoted public interest in the case in spite of the challenges. They developed a website to offer updates on the investigation as the internet started to gain popularity. An email purportedly written by Elisa appeared on the website on April 23, 1999. She said she was living in Brazil after leaving Potenza. The girl explained that she was unhappy and had to leave forever, but she also begged for forgiveness for hurting her family. "This will be my first and last letter to the family," she added. Filomena fervently hoped her daughter was still alive and well. Her sons weren't persuaded, though. They engaged a private investigator to track down the email's IP address because they knew their sister had left the house without cash or a passport, only to find out it was sent from a Potenza internet cafe rather than Brazil. Danilo Restivo was in the cafe when the email was sent, according to a list of all the patrons that day that the cafe staff had provided. Believing that Danilo had come up with this scheme to persuade them to stop looking for the girl, Elisa's family called the police right away and insisted on questioning him. They were informed, nevertheless, that there was nothing further they could do and that the investigation's active phase was over. 2,000 kilometers north of Potenza is the resort town of Bournemouth, which is situated on Britain's southern coast. For the Barnett family in Bournemouth, Tuesday morning, November 12, 2002, began as any other Tuesday morning. After dropping her children, Caitlin, age 11, and Terry, age 14, off at school, Heather Barnett, 48, came home after 8:30 a.m. As usual, Heather was eager to start working and have her morning tea. She made custom pillowcases, curtains, and other items from home. That day was no different from the many orders she always had. Terry and Caitlin came home from school a few hours later. Their mother was undoubtedly at home because her car was parked in the driveway and the radio was on, so the kids were a little uncomfortable with the unlocked front door. Their mother didn't answer. Caitlin called for her brother after looking in every room but the bathroom. She didn't want to enter for some reason. The kids knocked and got no answer, so they pushed the door, which slowly opened to reveal a horrifying scene. Evidently the victim of a very heinous crime, their mother lay on the floor. After phoning 911, Terry escorted his yelling sister outside to await the arrival of the police and ambulance. The neighbor across the street saw the two agitated kids while they were parking their car. Assuring the kids that they would be safe in their house, they took them inside. When the police arrived, they found no evidence of forced entry and that nothing had been stolen. Shortly after the woman dropped her kids off at school, the actual crime took place. Luminol testing showed that the woman's size 9 shoe prints led from the restroom to her workshop before abruptly vanishing in the center of the space. Before leaving the house, the murderer had obviously changed out of their filthy shoes and put on clean ones they had brought. The fibers found on the woman's body suggested that the offender had gloves on. Every piece of evidence suggested that the crime was well planned. The murderer arrived armed with gloves, a knife, a hammer, and a change of clothes and shoes. One piece of evidence, though, was left behind. A green hand towel that had been stained with Heather's blood was resting on the workshop chair. Only the murderer could have put the towel there, given its location and the fact that it did not belong to the family. Before putting on new clothes, they used it to clean their hands and face of the blood. The hair that was discovered in the woman's hands, however, was the most intriguing piece of evidence. At first, the police thought she had successfully removed a hair from the offender, but forensic examination showed something different. The hair in one hand belonged to Heather, but the hair in the other belonged to another woman, and it had been neatly cut with a sharp tool. Speaking with Caitlin and Terry, The detective discovered that their extra house keys had vanished a week prior to the murder. Although they changed the locks, they had suspicions because their neighbor had just come to get curtains for his girlfriend. The children were consoled by the same neighbor, an Italian man they called Danny. After moving to Britain in May 2002, Danilo Restivo, known to his neighbors as Danny, married Fiona Mozingo, an Italian woman he met online. Their residence was right across the street from Heather Barnett's. When the police arrived at the crime scene, they spoke with Danilo right away, and he quickly told them that he had an alibi for the whole morning. He said he went to classes at a computer center after taking a bus. His statements were fully supported by the police when they looked through his bus ticket and the center's registration log. However, Danilo grudgingly led the detective to the bathroom, where his sneakers were soaking in a bucket of bleach, when an officer came to his house 5 days later to take DNA samples and asked to see the shoes he had on the day of the crime. "I'm cleaning them," he explained. The detective became suspicious of this and seized the shoes. The sneakers did not, however, match the footprints that were discovered in Heather's home. The police had cause to suspect Danilo Restivo, despite the absence of concrete proof, because of his dubious actions when it came to cleaning his sneakers. When they chose to search a database for his name, they discovered something startling. Restivo's name had previously been connected to a criminal investigation. He might have been connected to the disappearance of Elisa Claps, a young Italian girl more than 10 years ago. His alibi for that case was also re-examined by investigators, who discovered that it was not as credible as first believed. He registered at a time that was rather awkwardly changed from 10:28 to 9:28 in the computer center's logbook. Nothing would have stopped him from getting off at the next stop and going back to Heather's house, even though he had a bus ticket with the allotted travel time. Additionally, at 9:24, a man who looked like him was seen on security footage crossing the street close to Heather's residence. Unfortunately, the man could not be precisely identified due to the poor quality of the video. However, Danilo was the main suspect in a case for the second time in his life, but this time, all of the evidence against him was circumstantial. When the detectives called the Potenza police, they learned of Danilo's uncommon fetish of chopping off the hair of unidentified girls. The investigators' conviction that he was involved in the crime was only reinforced by this information. When the police started monitoring Danilo Restivo in April 2004, they soon discovered another questionable behavior. Restivo enjoyed going to a secluded park in Throop, which is close to Bournemouth. There he would hide behind bushes and watch girls walking their dogs or jogging. Wearing 2 sets of clothes, waterproof pants, gloves, sunglasses, and a hooded sweatshirt that covered his face, he was in the park on May 12 despite the nearly summery weather. The police were worried that they wouldn't be able to stop another murder because of his suspicious behavior. A number of uniformed officers approached the suspect while posing as investigators of car thefts in the park and requested to examine his possessions in order to conceal the surveillance. Police discovered what they dubbed Restivo's murder kit, which included a big knife, ski mask, gloves, scissors, wet wipes, and trash bags. Remaining composed, Restivo said he had located the knife in the grass and had taken it to protect the kids. He claimed to be gathering insects for his pet lizard when asked what he was doing in the park. He was hiding in the park bushes, and even the police had to concede that it was a reasonable explanation. Once more, the detectives had nothing tangible to present to Danilo. The decision was made to switch strategies and ask for public support. The goal of the investigation was to identify the owner of the hair strands that were discovered in Heather's hand. They contacted the media in Italy and Britain, and since 2002, when Restivo relocated to Bournemouth, they have received a lot of calls from girls who have had their hair cut in incidents involving public transit in Britain. None of the DNA samples that the girls gave matched the hair that was discovered at the scene of the crime. The investigation stalled for a while until the hair strand was re-examined in 2007 using a new technique that could identify the hair's previous residence. It was discovered that the hair belonged to a girl who lived in the UK, but had traveled to Tampa, Florida, a few weeks after visiting Valencia, Spain, 2 months prior to having her hair cut. Motivated by such specific information, the police made another unsuccessful attempt to contact the public. The police worry that the girl might have been a victim of the killer's prior crime, but it's also possible that she was just not paying attention to the news. In spite of this early setback, science ultimately contributed to the case. since technology had greatly improved by 2009. Forensic specialists re-examined the green towel from Heather's home in the hopes of finding something new. This time, the specialists were able to distinguish Heather's blood from someone else's perspiration and skin fragments. An expert said that there was only a 1 in 5,7,000 chance that it was someone else's DNA, even though it couldn't be said with absolute certainty that it was Danilo Restivo's. Blood traces were discovered on the insoles of Restivo's sneakers when they were inspected that year using more advanced methods. This meant that when Restivo put on the shoes, his socks had blood on them. It supported the detective's hypothesis that the offender had brought an extra pair of shoes. Unfortunately, DNA analysis was completely impossible due to the bleach used, thus preventing Danilo and Heather's deaths from being directly linked. Restivo changed his clothes, put on gloves, and used bleach to get rid of bloodstains because he was aware of the evidence he might leave behind. Knowing what might link him to the crime scene, he made every effort to prevent it. He had a plan, was ready, and followed it. Thankfully, Restivo would eventually be charged with Heather's murder, but not before a terrible discovery was made in Italy. Something unexpected occurred in Potenza on March 17, 2010. The local church where Elisa had vanished years before was being repaired by workers. The attic door was no longer locked, and the priest had died 2 years earlier. 2 workers went upstairs, one using a flashlight to light his path while looking for roof damage. At that moment, he caught sight of something concealed behind construction debris in the room's corner. He was horrified to discover that he was staring at a mummified corpse. The girl's watch, glasses, and shoes were discovered on her body and were used to identify her. 17 years after going missing, Elisa Claps was found in the same church. She had died on the day of her disappearance, and her body had been dragged away and hidden, as the forensic examiner later concluded. Her body was found to have evidence of violence. However, several hair strands discovered in her hands, and a few more close to the body were the most damning pieces of evidence. Professor Vincenzo Pascali in Rome was tasked with analyzing a sample of foreign DNA discovered on the girl's body. But, to put it mildly, he carried out the investigation rather sloppily and had ties to the church where the crime was committed. He said that the DNA did not match Danilo Restivo, but when the investigator decided to confirm this and sent the sample to another lab, it did match Restivo's DNA. The professor was placed on 18 months of work suspension, and on May 19, 2010, Restivo was arrested. The jury found Danilo guilty of Heather's murder on June 30, 2011. Following 5 hours of deliberation, he received a life sentence without the chance of release. But after he prevailed in an appeal on November 21, 2012, the court modified the punishment for Heather's murder and gave him a minimum of 40 years in prison. Restivo was found guilty of Elisa Claps' murder and given a 30-year prison sentence in absentia on November 11, 2011. Investigators believe it is crucial to look into Danilo Restivo's relationship to other unsolved crimes in both Italy and Britain because of his obvious propensity for murder. It is thought that he was most likely involved in the death of a 27-year-old North Korean student studying English in Bournemouth. 2 months prior to Heather's murder, on July 12, 2002, the girl, who went by the name Jung-uk Shin, Loki, was making her way home on foot following an evening spent with friends. She was fatally injured by an unidentified attacker just 3 blocks from Restivo's residence. By yelling at him, Loki was able to repel him, and he even told the medical staff that the assailant was wearing a ski mask. After 3 tries, another man was found guilty of this crime, but his conviction was based only on the testimony of a female informant who had previously made false statements and frequently found herself intoxicated. There were many inconsistencies in her story, and she failed to mention the killer's ski mask. The 2 girls' physical similarities lend credence to the idea that Restivo was involved. Furthermore, the fact that the murder took place on the 12th of the month, as did the killings of Elisa and Heather, as well as the fact that Restivo visited the park where his murder kit was discovered, indicates the importance of this date to him. The length of the knife found in the park with Danilo is the same as the wound on Loki's body. Furthermore, different hair strands were discovered on the sidewalk close to Loki, but it was challenging to pinpoint their exact origin because of the nearby hair salon. From a legal standpoint, Loki's case is over. 2 murders have been formally charged against Danilo Restivo. Investigators are certain that there might be additional victims, though. Elisa's body was meticulously concealed, but Heather's was cruelly displayed for her own kids to see. Experts say that this shows that the criminal changed and that he was unable to stop on his own. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments, what part of this story shocked you the most? Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. On February 27, 2017, the 1-year-old Valerie Arrow was found dead in her home. The scene that unfolded before the eyes of the police was shocking in its cruelty. Valerie lay on the bed wearing a bathrobe, her wrists bound with a shoelace, and a scarf in her mouth as a gag. It was soaked in blood that had flowed from her throat. The room's floor was covered with the torn underwear of the girl, ripped in half. One obvious injury on her body was a strangulation mark on her neck. The police had even more to ponder after the autopsy. The toxicological analysis revealed that Valerie had been under the influence of multiple substances, and 2 scarves were discovered deep in her throat. They were so numerous that they might have killed her on their own. In addition, Valerie's backpack was discovered in the trash a few days prior by a building worker where the girl resided. Her papers, an ashtray, cigarette butts, a glass, shoes, apartment keys, and a blood-stained bedside lamp were all found inside. After compiling this data, the investigators came to the conclusion that the girl had committed suicide on her own volition. The matter was resolved. Naturally, Valerie's family was not pleased with this conclusion and made vain attempts to convince the police to look into the case as a murder. A girl named Law Martin's wallet and documents were discovered by hikers on the Fenway Trail 11 months later. The same day, they found the dead body of a 19-year-old girl in Bon Roppers Roquette in a canal about 20 kilometers away. She had taken off her socks and was completely nude. Law, who had been absent for 2 days, was there. According to the autopsy, the girl was strangled to death, but before she passed away, she had been sexually assaulted both vaginally and anally, using what appeared to be a baseball bat. The forensic specialist also discovered a torn spleen, which suggests a very powerful abdominal blow, like a kick. Despite starting an investigation, the police were unable to find any solid leads. Furthermore, nobody ever thought to link the 2 cases together, of course. After 7 years, the morning of February 11, 1997, arrived. In Toulouse, firefighters broke into a 4th-floor apartment in a multi-story building at 9 in the morning. They found a 29-year-old woman named Martin Matten's charred and lifeless body inside. Martin was on the bed, face down. There was a magazine from an automatic pistol on the floor and a ripped and blood-stained bra in the bathroom. Blood was all over the carpet and the bathtub, and a light bulb that had been unscrewed was lying on the floor. The firefighters came to the conclusion that there were 2 fires, 2 obvious attempts at intentional arson in the living room by the armchair and in the bedroom. After weighing all of the available evidence, the investigating police inspector came to the conclusion that Martin's death was caused by a choice she made. Emily Espies, then 21 years old, went into a Toulouse bar 10 days later, on February 26, 1997. She wanted to grab a drink with her friends in the afternoon. She met Patrice, a nice and attractive man in the bar. Because he gave Emily and her friends illegal drugs, he had his own method of luring girls. The rest of the day and the next morning were spent with Patrice and Emily. The young man asked Emily to accompany him to a concert that he was planning to attend that evening. He invited her and she accepted. They did, however, meet up with Patrice's friend Eve, whom he had been living with for a while prior to the concert. The young people in the group shared a meal and some beverages. After that, Patrice and Emily headed to the concert in Patrice's car, arriving at around 1:30 a.m. While Patrice spent more time drinking beer at the bar, Emily danced a lot. Emily asked her new acquaintance to drive her home at around 2 in the morning because she was exhausted from not sleeping for 2 days. The tired girl fell asleep right away, before she had even had a chance to sit in the car. She was lying on the back seat of the car when she woke up, even though it felt like only a moment had gone by. Emily opened her eyes and was shocked to see that she was being choked by Patrice. a buffer with protruding eyes. He was no longer the nice guy she'd spent the entire day with. How someone could spend a whole day with such a nice guy and then, in just 1 minute, transform into a monster who was now strangling her was beyond Emily's comprehension. Emily made an effort to resist. She tried to rip Patrice's hair, screamed and scratched him. Emily passed out after he repeatedly hit her face and told her to stop talking. She woke up without her underwear a few minutes later. She must have been violated by his attempt. Given the likelihood of her death, Emily made the decision to either pretend to be dead or speak to him. In an attempt to defuse the situation and maintain her composure, she decided to speak with Patrice. She reiterated that she understood everything, that excessive drinking causes such things, that everything was okay, and that she would keep it a secret. Patrice asked her to please him after stopping the car. Emily declined. He then accompanied her to the back seat, proceeded to undress her, and again violated her. Emily tried to maintain her composure. She kept conversing with him, downplaying the damage he had done to her. Patrice suddenly started crying and expressed regret for his actions. "You have 10 years of my life in your hands," he told Emily. He must have been sincere, because Emily didn't think he was such a great actor. She felt hope once more. Emily soothed her tormentor and attacker. Her only concern was to survive this nightmare, so she spoke softly to him. She asked him to drive her home after she was able to calm Patrice down. When he refused, they went to Patrice's friend Eve's place. Patrice stopped touching Emily as they lay down to sleep in the same bed. A sense of expectation developed. Despite going through hell, Emily is still alive. Even though the assailant was only a few centimeters away from her, she felt a little safer because she knew Eve was in the adjacent room. For several hours, the girl was able to sleep until she heard his girlfriend Eve awaken. They were in the kitchen when Emily got up. When Eve and his girlfriend Nora noticed Emily's facial bruises, they were appalled. She told them that a guy at the concert had attacked her. His face was hidden by a hood so she couldn't see it. Emily lied, primarily to protect herself but also to protect Patrice. She had been severely shaken and was still in shock after all. She might not have been completely conscious of what was going on, as though her soul had separated from her body. This is a typical defense mechanism used by traumatized individuals. Since Eve knew that his ex-girlfriend had thrown him out following a heated argument and didn't fully trust him, she discreetly pulled her aside and inquired as to whether Patrice had anything to do with it, even though she was staying with him. Nora is adamant that it was a guy from the concert and that Patrice had nothing to do with it. Patrice went to the kitchen as well after waking up. Emily was right when he said, "Yes, it was a guy in a hood. Unfortunately, there was no chance of catching him." Anyway, Emily was taken to the hospital by Nora. The girl's neck had evidence of strangulation, according to the doctors. She also had a number of facial injuries. She would need to stay in the hospital for a few days while being monitored by doctors. Emily felt at last more secure in the hospital. She made the decision to come clean and admit that Patrice had actually attacked her. But he had already vanished because he thought Emily might confess everything. Now that one of Patrice's victims was alive, the police began looking for him. He would spend 3 months evading capture. Patrice, now known as Frank, met Marie Norman at a country festival on June 14, $1,997. Murray lived in a chalet in a small town below Foix and was 35 years old. When the young man complained about having nowhere to stay, Murray felt sorry for him and offered to let him live with her in return for some housework. In addition, Murray decided that Frank would take care of the house while she visited her parents on the 20th. For a few days, Murray and Frank lived together in this manner. He fixed things and worked in the garden during the day, and they ate dinner, chatted, and smoked together in the evening. Murray and Frank had a terrific time on June 19th. She organized a dinner to celebrate Murray's new position at a wolf sanctuary in Orlu. They smoked cannabis and drank a lot. Clearly in a positive mood, Frank, that is Patrice, tried to plant a kiss on Murray. To avoid an unpleasant situation, she went into the bedroom, but it was obvious that she wasn't prepared for it. But then the man hit her against the wall, grabbed her by the head, and followed her into the room. Despite feeling lightheaded, Murray was able to escape his hold. Patrice then grabbed a chair and struck his victim, who had collapsed on the bed and was no longer conscious. He repeatedly attacked her viciously. He began choking her with his bare hands after this brought her back to consciousness. However, Murray was still breathing when he let go of her throat. Patrice then gagged her and tied her wrists and ankles. He then carried Murray's body to the first floor and started cleaning up to get rid of any remaining blood. To hide the bloodstains, he applied blue paint to the blue carpet. The top layer of blood-stained wooden furniture was removed with an angled grinder. The murderer washed his own clothes in the washing machine and set fire to sheets and clothing in the garden. He then buried Murray in her own garden after digging a hole in the garden and covering the victim's body with a blanket. He stole some valuable items that could be sold, such as the angle grinder, and 5,000 francs in cash the next evening before departing the chalet. He left the following note on the table to try to dispel suspicion. Murray, I don't know where you are. I finished my work and am leaving. Patrice was traveling to Spain in Murray's vehicle on June 20, 1997. In addition, it was his 29th birthday. Patrice arrived in the southern Spanish city of Alicante a few days later. He met Isabelle and Valerie, two French girls there. The young people soon became friends and spent days together, going for walks, eating meals, and tanning on the beach. The girls' holiday came to an end, and it was time for them to head back to Paris. They exchanged phone numbers and agreed to get together again in the future, if only they were aware. Patrice proceeded with his travels, stopping in Belgium and Germany before reaching Paris on September 1, 1997. He called Isabelle and Valerie, of course, and they decided to go out to dinner that same evening. Patrice told the girls that his car and all of his money had been stolen, but they were still glad to see their new friend again. He was very good at making himself look like a victim. Before leaving, he asked one of the girls if he could spend 2 days with them. Valerie was unable to take him because she was going on a business trip the following day, but Isabelle let him sleep on her sofa as long as it didn't last longer than 4 days. A loud explosion woke up the residents of the apartment building where Isabelle Shuchari, then 31 years old, lived on September 4, 1997. As it happened, the girl's apartment had been the scene of a fire before the explosion. Her body was discovered on the bed, partially burned. The fire started close to the restroom after the kitchen's gas burners were turned on. Isabelle's death was clearly not a coincidence. 3 glasses, a bottle of pink wine, and champagne were on the table, and the front door was left open. The killer's extreme cruelty was demonstrated by the wounds on the victim's body. Blood was dripping from her mouth, nose, and anus, and there was blood in the toilet. Isabelle's body, however, showed no signs of semen. Rather, a carrot that was stained with blood was discovered close to the mattress. It would be confirmed by the autopsy that the girl was tortured by the perpetrator. In addition, she had been badly beaten. Her face was primarily struck, but other parts of her body were also hit. The cause of death was asphyxia. Because of the testimony of Emily Espy, who survived Patrice Allegre's attack at the end of February, investigators were immediately alerted to the fact that Isabelle had provided shelter to a man named Patrice. This was because the police had been looking for a particular Patrice for a while. Then, Mireille Norman's relatives, who were expecting her as a guest, started to worry after she vanished. But her body wasn't discovered until 3 weeks later, when it was bound and buried in the garden. However, even though he gave a false name, many witnesses had seen his face and recognized him from the investigators' photos. So after the body was found, gendarmes' suspicions were strongly connected to Patrice. He was already being actively sought when he returned to Paris in early September. His search warrant made the rounds of France. The police reached out to his friends and family and offered a reward for helping to apprehend him. Patrice then got in touch with a friend and asked him if he could spend the night in Paris. At that point, the investigators saw a chance to capture him. They requested that this man give Patrice a call back and point him in the direction of a prime capture site in Châtenay-Malabry. At 5:10 p.m. on September 5, 1997, Patrice went inside the house where the police were already concealed. He didn't fight being arrested. He even appeared relieved to be arrested, as if he were sick of hiding, according to some witnesses. Unexpectedly, the public paid little attention to the serial killer's arrest. Since the investigators were initially unable to connect the various cases, it could be that the media failed to report that a serial killer was on the loose. However, it was also because the car accident and Princess Diana's death in Paris on August 31, 1997, took center stage in the news. Consequently, there was little media coverage of Patrice's arrest. it didn't garner much media attention. Patrice voluntarily cooperated when he was being questioned. He gave a detailed account of his crimes and admitted to them. He described them in the present tense as though reliving them, but with a totally detached expression, which made it terrifying. Patrice was taken into custody in connection with the assault on Emily S.B. and the killings of Isabelle Chichari and Mireille Norman. But he used a different name when Patrice mentioned Mireille Norman, the girl who let him stay in her chalet in return for helping out in the garden. The investigators wondered why he had given her the name Martine. They gradually came to understand that he was mistakenly thinking she was another of his victims. Investigators offered Patrice champagne, oysters, foie gras, and more outdoor walks in exchange for disclosing information about his other victims, because they knew he had a penchant for luxuries. In fact, Patrice later admitted to the murders of Valerie Thériault, Martine Mathias, and Law Martine, only after the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together as evidence that the detectives were already aware of. As is already well known, investigators came to the conclusion that Valerie Thériault and Martin Mathias had committed suicide, but as it happened, Patrice knew each of the women personally. He was co-workers with Valerie Thériault, who was a waiter at the same Toulouse cafe. She recognized Law Martine, who lived with him in the same area of Toulouse, and got into his car. She was Patrice's neighbor, Martin Mathias. They shared apartments across from one another. To put it another way, investigators were unaware of numerous hints that suggested Patrice Allegre was a potential suspect for a long time. For a serial killer, that was unusual. Even if they were only acquainted for a few days, as was the case with Emily, Patrice knew each of his victims by name. However, his approach was always the same. We hang out, spend time together, make friends, and then the attack happens. Investigators and later psychiatrists observed that Patrice found it much more difficult to explain the murders when they discussed them, even though he readily confessed to the killings and helped the investigation during interrogations. Every time, he described the incident as follows. He attempted to kiss the victim, but she refused, so he got angry and strangled her. The man claimed that he did everything by himself, but in certain instances he assaulted the victims with objects. This suggests that his account of the killings and assaults is not accurate. Does he have a bad memory of what happened, or is it a lie? It's difficult to say, but it calls into question his confession anyhow. Let's take Martin Mathias's case as an example. Patrice remembers that in early February 1997, he met her at McDonald's. After he asked to sit at her table, they struck up a conversation and discovered that boxing was a common interest. Patrice had previously trained under French boxing champion Martin Mathias. Patrice claims that Martin invited him to join her for a drink a few days later and agreed to meet with him again, and this meeting was when everything went wrong. This version isn't entirely supported by the autopsy, though. Despite not drinking, toxicological analysis showed that she had alcohol and chloroform in her system. Additionally, the intimate area of her body bore the scars of an electric shock. As you may remember, the electrical wiring in the apartment was altered, and a light bulb was unscrewed. This raises the possibility that Patrice stalked the girl because he lived across the street, even though the girl did not invite him to her home. Then, because Martin Mathias was stronger than him in normal conditions, he rendered her incapable of moving. It is crucial to recognize that there are differences between the killer's account and the available evidence, even though there are no facts that can be used to prove this. Furthermore, this suggests that he is not making an effort to be totally truthful with the inquiry. He also talked excitedly and in detail about his early years. On June 20, Patrice was born in Toulouse. At the age of 17, his mother, Michelle, a hairdresser, became pregnant with him. Roland, his father, was a police officer and 4 years her senior. He was always an unwanted child, and Patrice knew it. The second son, a desired child, was born to Michelle and Roland 7 years later. One could not say that Patrice had a happy childhood. His father would physically abuse his mother, and his parents would frequently quarrel. When Patrice attempted to step in, he was beaten instead. Being a police officer, Roland neglected his son and was frequently away from home. In contrast, Patrice's mother didn't seem to care much for him. But when Patrice was young, she collapsed into an alcoholic coma in front of him in her beauty salon, because she was an alcoholic. She also consistently cheated on her husband and was unfaithful to him. Patrice was able to observe some of her private interactions and the post-fight reconciliations between Michelle and Roland. He would frequently try to sleep in his room by covering his head with a pillow to block out the sounds of his mother's groans coming from the room next door. Another time, when Patrice, then 6, was sitting in the back seat and watching everything, she got pleasure from one of her friends in the car. Patrice idolized his mother and hated his father in spite of everything. He would stand up for her and was offended when others made disparaging remarks about her. He had to repeat a year multiple times because he struggled to learn in school. Because his mother permitted it, he would skip classes. He started stealing, selling drugs, and committing crimes during this time. But each time he was taken into custody, his father would save him. For instance, Roland once compensated the victims of Patrice's thefts with 300 francs. His actions may have stemmed from a traumatic incident that happened to him when he was 13 years old. 2 boys kidnapped him after he fled his home. He was abused in a car and drugged with strong illegal substances before being abandoned on the side of a distant road. For a boy who was not yet 14, this could not have failed to leave scars. This gives us a chance to learn more about him, but it doesn't excuse what he did later. He began abusing drugs and drinking excessively when he was 14 years old. The issue was that under the influence of drugs, Patrice, who was characterized as charming when sober, underwent a radical transformation. He became so genuinely aggressive that his friends, who were aware of it, were terrified of him. Patrice once became furious when someone made a negative comment about his younger brother while he was intoxicated at a bar. After leaving, he came back to the bar brandishing a weapon, held it to the victim's head, and squeezed the trigger. The gun miraculously failed to discharge, and Patrice was captured. His first and last murder might have been this one. At the age of 17, Patrice Allegre attacked a girl for the first time. Everything was going well when he first met the girl at a party. They went to a park, where the girl pushed Patrice away when he tried to approach her. It should be clear to you by now that rejections made him furious. He apologized, took the girl home, and immediately stopped choking her. But his strategy was already starting to take shape. It's interesting that Patrice never had issues with girls. Rather, the issue was that he had 2 sides. He was charming as long as the girl agreed, but if she didn't, he had to coerce her into giving him what he wanted. Patrice had 2 committed romantic relationships in his life. Cécile was the subject of the first. Their first real love story began in 1986, when Patrice was 18 years old. After 7 years of dating, the young couple had a daughter. But their relationship ended in 1989, just months after he committed his first murder. Their bond was similar to Patrice's parents. Patrice would physically assault Cécile during their heated arguments, but Patrice could control himself to some extent with Cécile. He tried to strangle her, for instance, but stopped when he said, "No, not you, not you." Cécile ended up in the hospital in 1994 with a broken jaw. After she lodged a complaint, Patrice was placed under arrest for a number of weeks. Cécile ultimately made the decision to end her relationship with Patrice in 1995. He met Sylvie the following year, and the two would live together until February 1997, when Sylvie also left Patrice because of his violent behavior. At that exact moment, Patrice attacked Émilie after moving into his friend Yves' home. On February 11, 2002, Patrice's trial got underway in Toulouse. He was charged with 5 murders, 1 attempted murder, and 6 violent crimes. Numerous errors made by the police during Valérie Thériault and Martin Mathias's investigation, which led them to conclude it was a suicide, were brought up during the trial. Given that his father was one of them, there were even rumors that the police were shielding Patrice. It was only a conspiracy theory, though. Psychiatrists examined Patrice's case, which was uncommon for criminal cases in France. His divergent views on his father and mother were among the most intriguing features. He vilified his father while exalting his mother. He even told his mother that they ought to murder his father when he was 13 years old. In spite of this, Patrice's father, Roland Allegre, showed up in court, took the witness stand, and looked his son in the eyes while declaring his love for him, in spite of everything he had done. He compared his crimes to those of his father, and Patrice's response was, "Well, I don't love you, I hate you. I should have killed you, as I told Mom. Then I wouldn't have caused so much harm." But he never once put the blame for anything on his mother. Psychiatrists think that the trauma from his mother's private adventures had a big impact on him. As a child, he was terrified by his mother's groans, but as an adult, he developed into a powerful man who tormented women by stifling their groans, the very essence of these women. It's interesting to note that he never attacked while his victims were unconscious. Emily, who was fortunate enough to wake up and speak to him, was the first victim to calm him down and persuade him not to kill her. Emily regained her human face when she woke up, but it seemed as though he could render girls unconscious and do whatever he wanted with them. He himself stated, "I have a memory lapse. I remember choking her, then she came to and I apologized. It brought me to my senses. I'm ashamed of what I did. I don't know what to say." It's also intriguing why, despite the apparent attraction between the young people, girls abruptly turned him down. The psychologist believes that he unintentionally caused the women to reject him. As is typical of killers who have personally experienced violence as children, he desired control over the victim. It was his strange method of taking charge of the circumstance again. Given that he violated each and every one of his victims, it would appear that the motive is simple to determine. It's not that easy, though. He acknowledged that he did not enjoy the attacks, despite the fact that this explanation seems the most obvious. For someone who occasionally has normal relationships and at other times commits horrible murders, he is more than just a sexual maniac. According to a U.S. psychiatrist who examined him, it was far more important to have control over the situation. Essentially, rather than humiliation leading to violence, violence led to humiliation. He was never able to explain why he killed. He spoke enthusiastically with psychiatrists during the trial, hoping they would answer this question for him. Another crucial query was whether Patrice had any additional victims, particularly during the period between 1990 and 1997. That is quite possible, because some of his known victims were not properly investigated. Even though Patrice says he didn't kill anyone else, is he reliable? At first, he only admitted to one violent act and 2 murders. To find out if he might be accountable for any other unsolved crimes, the police assembled a team of experts. They were able to get a clue from Patrice regarding the unresolved murder case of Lynn Gabaldi by promising her champagne and oysters, along with another walk. After looking into 191 unresolved cases since 1984, they were able to locate 2 witnesses who had previously worked as prostitutes in Lynn Gabaldi's case: Crystal Berg, also known to the public as Patricia, and Florencia Caliafi, who was known to the media as Fanny. They all accused Patrice of killing Lynn, but in addition to him, they also accused Marc Barrage, the Toulouse prosecutor, of committing crimes. He allegedly hosted sadomasochistic parties where judges and politicians would have a good time. According to Fanny, the girls were abused, tortured, and occasionally killed because they did not voluntarily attend the parties. The orgies prostitutes were supplied by Lynn Gabaldi. Marc Barrage ordered Patrice to kill her because she threatened to tell the police everything. The name of Dominique Baudis was mentioned once. He was the former mayor of Toulouse and is said to have been with Barrage when Lynn was murdered. As the tension around his case increased, Patrice wrote a letter to a popular program claiming that Barrage and Baudis were in fact a part of a criminal organization. Fanny was interviewed by the same show 2 weeks later, during which she described the children she witnessed shackled in a torture chamber on the ground floor of a home close to Toulouse. However, Patrice withdrew his confession to the murder of Lynn Gabaldi only 15 days later. Later, it came to light that Patrice and Fanny had received generous compensation from the show's producers for their stories. It also turned out that Marc Barrage didn't even know Patrice, and Dominique Baudis couldn't have been at Lynn's murder because he was in Paris. Patrice and Fanny were accused of giving false testimony, and the politicians were exonerated of the charges. For providing false testimony, Fanny and Patrice received sentences of 18 months and 3 years in prison, respectively. In July 2005, Patrice Allegre was given a life sentence on February 21, 2002, with the possibility of release after 22 years. He has already completed the required 22 years of service and is currently 54 years old. He started dating a Canadian psychologist during this period who relocated to France and lived near her prison-dwelling beloved. Patrice must want to see the woman and his daughter when they are not incarcerated. He applied for early release, but he dropped the plan after psychiatrists concluded that he has not been rehabilitated and that he has a very high risk of relapsing despite his best efforts. 9 years after the attack in 2006, Emily, the only survivor of Patrice's assault who testified against her attacker in court, died. Regretfully, she decided to do this herself. That concludes the terrifying tale for today. Please remember to like and subscribe if you liked this video, so you don't miss any future uploads. Tell me in the comments what surprised you the most about this story as well. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. She was a virtuoso in her art and a master of tricks, never leaving any traces behind. Her lack of humanity was the only thing that made her successful. Nobody could have predicted that a quiet but intelligent girl would grow up to be one of the world's most skilled criminals, behind a long string of schemes that funded her transformation from a regular girl into a dangerous individual living in luxury. The vicious con artist, who had a taste for killing, was the epitome of evil and was always one step ahead of the police. Until they finally got a chance to confront her in person. Steve and Jane McGowan, who lived in Florida, received a letter from their sister Beverly, who was 34, on Thursday, July 19, 1990. She wrote that she was leaving them and starting a quest to discover who she was in this world. Beverly went on to say that she planned to leave right away, so she was selling her apartment and resigning from her job. The brother and sister were shocked by what they read in the letter. Beverly had put in a lot of effort and was happy with her new home and job. She worked 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage and had just bought the apartment of her dreams. When Jane rushed to the police station to report her sister's disappearance, the letter claimed that Beverly had left on her own initiative, so there was little the authorities could do. Steve and Jane went to Beverly's apartment in Pompano Beach to try to find answers to their questions after discovering notepad sheets at her house with the letter written in her handwriting. They saw right away that Beverly's red Volkswagen Fox was not parked where it usually was. Even though Beverly wasn't in the apartment, it didn't seem like she had moved out permanently. Clothes hung in the closet, a nightshirt rested on the unmade bed, and dirty dishes were in the sink. But there were also indications that Beverly had no plans to come back. Her 2 cats were nowhere to be seen, the answering machine was gone, and the phone was disconnected. After searching through drawers, Steve and Jane found that Beverly's address book, birth certificate, and passport were also gone. In addition to her part-time job at a nonprofit, Beverly worked in a bank's loan department. Steve called the bank to ask if her coworkers could provide more information. They told him that Beverly had taken a sick day, claiming to be ill, the day before he got the farewell letter. Given Beverly's reputation as a trustworthy and accountable worker, this was out of the ordinary. She asked them to sell the mortgaged property and get rid of her personal belongings that were still in the apartment during the phone call, adding that she no longer wanted to live there. In order to confirm her request, Beverly was asked to send a telegram, which she did. Steve and Jane had to accept that their sister had actually left without telling anyone why, despite the peculiar circumstances. Nevertheless, Steve closed Beverly's credit cards and persuaded the police to report her missing. Closing the cards would upset her travel schedule and make her angry enough to call the family, he thought. While Steve and Jane were checking out their sister's apartment that same evening, a fisherman and his young niece went fishing to find bait for their next trip. They reached a broad irrigation canal in a secluded part of St. Lucie County, 160 kilometers north of Pompano Beach. When the fisherman saw what looked like a bag of trash, he left his niece in the car and started to walk along the canal. He rushed back to the car and called the police as he got closer and recognized what it was. When deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office got to the spot the fisherman had pointed, they found a woman's body. It was clear that in addition to killing her, the killer did everything in his power to hide her identity. But he missed something. A tiny tattoo of a yellow rose was concealed under the woman's jeans on her right ankle. The media was given the tattoo's description in the hopes that locals would recognize it. Around 10 p.m., Steve McGowan had already arrived home when the phone rang. It was his sister's missing friend. She had recently learned of the discovery in the St. Lucie Canal and Beverly's corresponding tattoo. Steve and Jane went to St. Lucie the following day to talk to investigators and show them a picture of their sister. Although conventional identification techniques had to be disregarded due to the body's condition, they were both certain that it was their Beverly. A comparison of her dental records proved it was her. No blood or suspicious objects were found during the examination of Beverly's apartment. No indication of a struggle was present. Jane and Steve were unable to comprehend who would hurt their sister. Her nephews in particular loved her, and she loved them in return. Beverly didn't have a lot of money, and she didn't have any complicated relationships. The deaths of her two boyfriends in different auto accidents cast a shadow over her life, but Steve was sure Beverly had been enjoying her life lately, even in spite of her past. Despite working 2 jobs, Beverly's income was insufficient to pay her mortgage. She began renting out one of her apartment's bedrooms in order to supplement her income. Investigators discovered a notebook containing a list of possible tenants while searching her apartment. Except for one, each entry contained the full name, phone number, and the time of the apartment viewing. Alice was the only name on the first line, which was scheduled for Tuesday at 6:30. Beverly had heard nothing but good things about Alice. She worked for the famous company IBM, was from London, drove a fancy car, and was immaculately dressed. Due to a temporary transfer to the company's Fort Lauderdale office, Alice had relocated to the area. She told her friend that Alice would be moving in on Friday, July 20th, and she had impressed Beverly enough that she decided to make her the new neighbor. By the way, Beverly said she was first introduced to numerology by Alice. Alice tried to forecast Beverly's future, but she required a number of numbers that were important to Beverly, including her date of birth, social security number, passport number, and even information from her driver's license. The odd thing is that Beverly gave her all these numbers. She shared Alice's future predictions with her friends because, all things considered, she was happy with them. Regretfully, she didn't give them her new neighbor's last name. The identity of Alice was still unknown. Furthermore, there was no proof that Alice had ever been to Beverly's apartment, let alone moved in. When the investigators contacted IBM, they were told that the company did not have any UK workers in the South Florida region. They didn't even have a Fort Lauderdale office. According to the results of the financial investigation, someone took $795 out of the $800 in Beverly's bank account on the day her body was discovered. Then, at a Miami shopping center, she used her credit card to buy books and women's clothes. The customer was described as bright blonde with a British accent by the salespeople who assisted her. The tall blonde woman who had garnered national attention at the time fit the description. Police officer Lori Bembenek had been given a life sentence in 1,982 years, 8 years prior, for killing her ex-husband's ex-wife. There had been a stir about the case. Lori was somewhat of a celebrity due to her glitzy appearance and the high-profile nature of the case. Lori had freed herself from Wisconsin prison a few days prior to Beverly's murder. The Miami salesperson identified Lori Bembenek as the person who had used Beverly's credit card after seeing pictures of her, until it was revealed that Lori had actually fled to Canada and was not in Florida at the time of the crime. The police were baffled as to how the path of a modest bank employee could have intersected with that of a convicted killer. However, Beverly's card was used once more in Miami, this time at a travel agency, on Friday, July 20, 1 day after her body was found. Interestingly, the cardholder looked like a man disguised as a woman. The individual wore oval-shaped glasses and a cheap black wig in the Cleopatra style. The man identified himself as Sam and spoke with a British accent. Sam apparently used the card to buy a ticket for British Airways Flight 2922 because he was going to London in 2 days, on July 22nd through 2922. Investigators looked through Flight 292's passenger registration records and those of every other flight that was scheduled to depart for Britain on July 22. None of them bore the name of Beverly McGowan, but after being parked there for 5 days, Beverly's car was discovered in the airport parking lot. 4 synthetic black wig hairs were found inside the car, but fingerprints inside the car did not show any significant results. On Monday, July 23rd, according to London time, British Airways Flight 292 touched down at Heathrow Airport. A traveler with oval glasses and short black hair came up to the Avis car rental desk after the plane touched down. The passenger, who was most likely Sam, provided her driver's license as identification and made a car reservation in Beverly McGowan's name. Beverly wore glasses and her dark hair reached her shoulder. She looked like the person behind the counter. Sam gave Beverly's Visa card to the clerk when she asked for a credit card to pay for the car's fuel. However, the card was turned down. They may have gone over the limit and paid in cash, Sam clarified. Actually, Beverly's credit cards had been canceled by her brother Steve by that point. Sam was long gone by the time Florida detectives found out about this botched transaction. Transactions on the credit card could not be tracked because it was no longer in use. American law enforcement agencies had no jurisdiction over Sam once he arrived in Britain. Detectives from Florida called the London police to ask for help. John Cornish, a detective, consented to assist with the global investigation. He talked to the Avis company and told their employees to tell the suspect to go to their closest office if he got in touch with them. Sam did get in touch with Avis later that week. He was asked to come to the local Avis office and asked for an extension on the rental car. Sam never arrived at the location where the police were waiting for him. On the day of the car's return, a contingency plan was developed in which officers would wait at Heathrow Airport. When that day finally came, Sam was nowhere to be seen. Without any hints, Sam's abandoned car was discovered a few miles from the airport in the early morning. Detective Cornish ordered his team to board all flights to the U.S. that day in order to check the passengers, because he suspected Sam might be trying to fly back to the U.S. However, this effort was in vain. The chance to capture the criminal was lost on the police. British Airways Flight 292 was the last lead the police had. Sam had purchased a ticket in a different name because he did not board the flight using Beverly's passport. Although it was illegal for investigators to check passengers who did not live in Florida, they made an effort to examine the 248 people on that flight. So they turned to the United States for help, State Department in Washington, D.C. The process could take years because each passenger's name had to be compared with passport information, and there was no single database that contained all of this data. The State Department didn't give the police a name they considered significant until January 1996. British national Sylvia Hodgkinson was on Flight 292. A woman with dark hair and eyebrows was shown in the passport photo. She was compelled to relocate to a women's shelter following the death of her spouse. There was nowhere else for her to go. A passport was issued in her name less than a year after her husband's passing. It was suspected by investigators that someone else had taken Sylvia's identity in order to obtain documents in her name. There was fear that Sylvia had met a similar end to Beverly's because they were unable to find her in any way. Additionally, the State Department found a fascinating link between Sylvia and two other women, Elaine Antoinette Parent and Charlotte Ray Callan. An incident that happened a year after Beverly's murder revealed that all three identities were unintentionally connected. A woman in a rental car was approached by North Miami police on May 22, 1991. It was past due to return the car, which had been rented in Los Angeles 6 months prior. To hide its origin, stolen license plates were affixed to the vehicle. A tall redhead woman, who introduced herself to the officers as Charlotte Ray Cowan, sat inside the vehicle. The woman's personal diary, 2 dogs, multiple wigs, and several documents bearing Charlotte's photo under the names Sylvia Hodgkinson and Elaine Parent were all evidently in the car with her. Charlotte's failure to return the rented car led to her arrest by the police. The following day, she posted bail after spending the night in jail. Surprisingly, the police did nothing about this issue, even though the woman was clearly using a false identity. One of the arresting officers was in the building on the day of Charlotte's court hearing for the offense. A redhead woman stood up when Charlotte's turn to appear before the court came. The officer who had arrested Charlotte, however, was taken aback to discover that the woman he had arrested was not the same one who had been called to court by the subpoena. Charlotte was perplexed as to why she had been summoned to court so abruptly. She questioned the officer about the height and red hair of the woman he had arrested. She boldly declared that she knew exactly who it was when he said yes. Almost 10 years prior, in the middle of the 1980s, Charlotte was unwinding at an Orlando bar when a well-dressed woman with a British accent came up to her. Like Charlotte, she had stunning blue eyes and short red hair. The woman offered to buy Charlotte a drink and identified herself as Anne Tremont. The offer was accepted by Charlotte, and they struck up a conversation. Anne mentioned numerology in passing during their conversation. She began by requesting Charlotte's birth date, adding that she would be pleased to make a matching matrix for her. Anne took Charlotte's driver's license information and social security number one by one. She wrote it all down on a napkin and made a hopeful forecast for Charlotte's future. Anne and Charlotte began talking and became friends right away. Charlotte met Anne's brother a few days later. He was a tall, blonde man who shared his sister's grace. The women eventually lost contact with one another, though, as they saw each other less and less. When Anne called Charlotte a few months later to inform her that her aunt had died and left her a sizable inheritance, Charlotte was taken aback. Anne claimed that her brother had chosen to have her institutionalized in order to keep all of the money for himself, even though they were meant to split it. Anne showed up at Charlotte's door at 3 a.m, approximately a month after the phone call. She was wearing a man's shirt with a tie and a tangled wig. She broke down in tears as she described how she had gotten out of the institution where her brother had put her. She needed assistance going missing because she was hiding from her family. In order to establish a new identity for herself, Anne pleaded with Charlotte to let her take her birth certificate. At first, Charlotte declined, but after witnessing Anne's distress, she grudgingly consented. The birth certificate would be returned shortly, her friend assured her. Charlotte didn't hear from Anne for weeks. She started to worry. The birth certificate and a note from Anne expressing regret for the wait were finally sent to her. It wasn't until she was summoned to court in 1991 that Charlotte learned more about her friend. After hearing this intriguing tale, the investigators were curious to find out who the mysterious and elusive scammer was. Although not much was known about Elaine Parent's life, she was a real person like everyone else. On August 4, 1942, she was born in the Bronx, New York. Her parents were loving and reasonably well off, and she was their only child. She was a tall, slim beauty with dark hair and piercing blue eyes by the time she reached adulthood. She relocated to Florida at the age of 30, where she briefly worked at a real estate company before being arrested for shoplifting in Fort Lauderdale in 1976. They took her fingerprints and put them in the database. She then stole $40,000 worth of jewelry from an elderly acquaintance in 1985. Parent and Charlotte met at about the same time. The fingerprints of the parent and the woman who was arrested in 1991 for not returning a rented car were compared. They were identical. Elaine Parent was the woman posing as Charlotte Cowan. Naturally, it was assumed that Elaine Parent, the elusive suspect Sam, and the new neighbor Beverly McGowan's Alice were all the same person. They still had to establish a clear connection between Elaine and Beverly's murder, though. In addition to reviewing the case's evidence, the detectives looked through a notebook that contained letters that Beverly had written to her sister and brother. This specialized equipment uses an electrostatic detection device, ESDA, to find impressions or indentations left by previously written letters on paper. The notebook had been used for a number of other letters that weren't written in Beverly's handwriting, according to the analysis of the notebook. The author appeared to be a woman with a deep-seated animosity toward Beverly. Threats were included in the rather aggressive messages. Elaine Parent's handwriting samples were compared to the letters, and they matched. Parent's letters were sent to a woman in London who was the chief executive officer of a large corporation. She filled in many of the gaps in the elusive fraudster's life, but was named Witness X in the case materials for her protection. The woman disclosed that she and Elaine became friends right away after meeting during a trip to Miami in the 1980s. Elaine reportedly fled to London in 1985 while the police were looking for her in connection with the jewelry theft, and she asked Witness X if she could stay with her. However, Elaine's unstable and explosive temperament quickly made it clear to the two young women that they couldn't live together. The scammer went back to the United States in 1990, but Witness X was shocked when she left for London at the end of July. She was operating an Avis rented vehicle. Parent stole two of her old friend's dogs and fled to the United States 3 months after she returned to London. She then tried to extort a ransom for her dogs by sending Witness X threatening letters. Clearly, these were the same dogs that were discovered in her possession when she was arrested in Miami in 1991. The State Department accused Parent of forging her passport by the end of 1996, but they were clueless as to where she might be hiding. Elaine Parent was featured in an episode of the television program America's Most Wanted in 1998. Patricia Evans of St. Petersburg, Florida, was watching television at home when the show started. She instantly recognized Elaine when she saw her photo. Elaine was known to Patricia Nevins, a church employee, as Sandra Little, a blonde. In 1992, Patricia met Sandra Little while she was residing in a St. Petersburg homeless shelter. Sandra lived with Patricia for nearly a year and a half after Patricia let her use her empty bedroom. Sandra sued a restaurant during this time after she hurt herself after slipping there. She prevailed in the case and was compensated, though it is unknown how much. Patricia talked about a number of odd things that happened when she lived with Elaine. She was once informed by Elaine that adopting a new identity was one way to live a dignified life. After that, at a dinner party, Parent indiscriminately cut a guest's hand in order to take a gold bracelet. Elaine's psychiatrist, whom Patricia arranged for Elaine to see, told Patricia that Elaine was a highly intelligent sociopath who would leave Patricia's life as soon as she entered it. When the women parted ways in 1993, this prophecy was realized. An interesting letter was delivered to the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office after the police made a public plea for the community's assistance in apprehending Elaine. There was a copy of an oil-colored painting inside. It showed Elaine Parent, with pearl earrings and a teal-green swimsuit. She had gray hair that was styled the way her parents usually did. She was shown emerging from a swimming pool. This was printed on the back. "Best wishes, your chameleon." According to psychiatrist Barbara Caven, who had been helping the police with the case, Parent both feared and desperately needed police attention. The painting is very telling. She sent it to the police to taunt them, as if to say, "I'm alive, I'm okay, look for me." Elaine gained international recognition after appearing in the documentary series World's Most Wanted in February 2009. People from all over the world began reporting that they had seen Parent in South Africa, Australia, France, and Turkey. The media referred to her as the most wanted woman in the world. Elaine Parent was featured in another episode of America's Most Wanted in April 2002, and Happy, and 16,000 minors in Russia. After the show, many calls were received from the wealthy Panama City, Florida neighborhood, identifying a woman there as Elaine. The address was visited by 3 police officers. When they reached a small one-story home, they knocked on the door. The door was answered by a brunette middle-aged woman wearing a beige silk pajama set. The officers gave an explanation for their visit to her. Presenting her military ID with her photo on it, the woman identified herself as Darlene Thompson. The officers had seen a picture of Elaine Parent, but she didn't look like her. She was asked to accompany the officers to the station for formalities, even though they knew the neighbors had erred. Darlene consented and asked the officers to hold off while she changed. As the officers waited outside the bedroom, one of them looked over Darlene's identification card and, as a former military man, he saw right away a vital missing stamp that verified the document's legitimacy. She replied that she was getting dressed when the officer knocked on the bedroom door to ask about this. She never emerged, despite the officers waiting for her to do so. When the officers hurried into the bedroom after hearing a gunshot, they discovered Darlene dead. The identity of Darlene and Elaine Parent was formally verified by subsequent fingerprint analysis. Elaine lived in a house that turned out to belong to another woman. She had rented a room to Elaine since August 2001. She is a nice woman who loves to cook, according to the homeowner. Elaine's Florida driver's license, which had her photo on it but the name of the woman she was staying with, was discovered during the house search. She had jotted down details about a man from the nearby town of Lynn Haven, including his credit cards and social security number, in a notebook. Elaine's closet was stocked with men's and women's clothes, as well as wigs. They also found a book on theatrical makeup and another on learning French. Elaine's laptop, which some of her acquaintances claimed she frequently used for work, was never located. When she was arrested more than a decade ago, she had her diary with her because Charlotte Cowan was also missing. The police discovered a flyer featuring a picture of Elaine and the name Antonia Racerman, which is another fascinating aspect of the portrait. It looked as though Elaine had made the flyer herself, and the local police chief later conjectured that she had done it to intimidate someone. The flyer said that she was wanted by the FBI for the murder of a government official at a hotel in Washington, D.C. Many questions remained after Elaine's death. According to the police, she used up to 20 different identities in countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Turkey, Israel, France, and South Africa. Although no other victims have been located, some believe she may have committed more murders. There are differing views on whether she worked alone or with an accomplice. Investigator Norma Pfeiffer told the media 3 years before she died, "The brutality of the McGowan murder makes me think that someone capable of this has either done it before or will do it again. She couldn't have run Beverly alone, according to some. And let's not forget about the handsome blonde man she passed off as her brother." According to psychologist Barbara Kerwin, Elaine is a virtuoso in her field, who can read people's souls and identify their weak points with ease. The reason behind her crimes is still entirely unknown, though. Why, given her high IQ, would someone like Elaine decide to commit crimes rather than excel in any other field, especially since her crimes brought her more fame than fortune? Kerwin, however, feels she is aware of the motivation behind Elaine's plots, her own inner demons. Barbara said, "I believe she impulsively stole the identities of others to fill her own emptiness." And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. It was a very pleasant evening for the Solis family on Friday, April 20, 2012. Their 6-year-old sister, young Isabel, was present at a baseball game between Rebecca and Sergio's 2 sons. The family went home after the game, which lasted until 10 o'clock. Rebecca braided the girl's hair to save time before work the following morning, when she was scheduled to play baseball. After saying goodnight to his daughter, Sergio departed at 11 o'clock. Isabel frequently slept in her brother's room, even though she had her own bedroom. This night, however, she remained by herself. Becky and the boys soon fell asleep, and Sergio dozed off on the couch as he watched a baseball game that he had previously recorded. The man woke up at 5 and walked slowly to the bedroom. When he went to sleep beside his wife, the house was calm and quiet. Rebecca left for work at the medical center 2 hours later. The woman heard nothing and saw nothing out of the ordinary in the house. She left for work without visiting her daughter's room. Isabel wasn't in her bed when Sergio went to get her up for the game at about 8 in the morning. No one answered when he asked his sons if they had seen their sister. He called for Isabel and searched the house with the boys, but she didn't answer. Then, at the age of 14, Sergio Jr. saw that his sister's room had an open window and that the protective screen was on the ground in the yard. While Rebecca was hurrying home and the sons were desperately looking around the neighborhood for their younger sister, Sergio called his wife. Sergio dialed the emergency number. This was the call that ultimately led to a great deal of controversy and backlash against him. Sergio was remarkably composed throughout the call, despite the fact that people react differently when under stress or panic. In addition to his composure, many found it odd that he announced his daughter's kidnapping right away. The idea of telling his wife to come home even made him laugh. Sergio clarified that he was only attempting to maintain composure so that he could give the police all the information they required. It's interesting to note that Sergio Jr.'s neighbor also dialed 911. He was obviously upset and trembling, unlike his father, but he also said right away that his sister had been abducted and that they would not be able to locate her. Rebecca, who had also been in a state of panic and despair upon arriving at her house, was then given the phone. She was able to provide a detailed account of the attire her daughter was wearing prior to going missing. In fact, the girl's bedroom window had a protective screen on the ground in the yard when the officers arrived. It had a big hole in it, like it had been made with a tool. Soft toys that were always lying in the room beneath the girl's window were now strewn about. Isabel's shoe prints, which were found on the electrical box beneath the family's high fence and on the alley behind the house, were found on the floor next to blood. When he kidnapped the girl, the criminal most likely climbed over it. The police conducted extensive door-to-door searches, dismissing the possibility that the 6-year-old girl had escaped because they thought the case was one of kidnapping. Around 6:30 a.m., Alicia Stardevant, the Solis family's neighbor, reported being awakened by a noise. The girl's room is right across the fence from her bedroom. Alicia claimed to have heard the barking of the Solis family's dogs as well as her own. She heard men's voices outside of them, as if they were coming from her side of the fence rather than the Solis family's house. However, she ignored the fact that it was already becoming light outside and went back to sleep. The men didn't whisper or lower their voices, according to Alicia, and she didn't even consider the possibility that there was a small child present. Only locals were permitted to pass through the checkpoint that the police had set up around the Solis family's home. Since children are typically killed within 100 meters of the scene of the kidnapping, the search initially concentrated on a small area surrounding the house. After that, they interviewed residents and broadened the search area to include multiple apartment complexes. Officers used underwater cameras and sonars to examine the lakes and ponds, the local garbage dump, and the stadium where Isabel's baseball game was scheduled to take place. The Solis family's house was searched by forensic specialists and search dogs, and border guards handed out pictures of Isabel. There is a significant likelihood that children who disappear in Arizona wind up on the Mexican border. Furthermore, 16 criminals who had harmed women and children resided close to the family's residence in 2012. At the time, they were all questioned and turned away. There was a theory that someone had followed the family after spotting Isabel playing with her brothers in the evening and kidnapped the girl from the house at night. Officers followed this lead by looking up the registration numbers of every vehicle in the parking lot. The family's home was close to surveillance cameras, which revealed an exceptionally bustling nightlife. A car belonging to a private security firm pulled up in the alleyway close to the house at 2:36 a.m. 10 minutes later, 2 more cars were spotted in the parking lot. All of a sudden, there were a lot of people walking around the house, some of them curious about the trash cans. A car sped around the corner next to the trash can an hour before the 911 call, but during the 10 hours of filming, the girl did not show up anywhere. However, when the police searched the house, they found something intriguing. Inscriptions were discovered by the officers on Isabel's wardrobe doorframe. Rebecca said she was unaware of the inscriptions, which were written in a child's handwriting and contained phrases like "bad father," "I don't love father," and "bad day." Nevertheless, the police chose to thoroughly question Isabel's family. According to one of the sons, their father got violent, cursed, and struck him twice after drinking. Concerned about the Solis sons, investigators invited Child Protection Services staff because, as it turned out, the agency had been called to the family's residence multiple times. One of the boys left a glass in the detergent while doing the dishes in January 2012. Sergio reprimanded his son for his error and drank water from that glass. The boy told his friends about the incident the following day, and someone's parents called Child Protection Services, despite Rebecca's insistence that they laughed about it. In any case, Sergio willingly left the house in May 2012 at their request, despite Rebecca's assertion that her husband was a great father and that all questions would be addressed when Isabel got home. Sergio was able to return home to his wife and sons after the incident was quickly resolved, but the family was disappointed that the investigation produced no findings. The police kept focusing on them, Sergio in particular, even though they were never named as suspects. "It feels like the investigation never went beyond this house," the man later said. "That is the reason it is so distressing." They therefore engaged private investigator Jerry Snyder to look into Isabel's kidnapping objectively, and he suspected Rebecca's cousin Justin Master Mourinho. Initially, Justin spoke to reporters and conducted interviews as a spokesperson for the family. However, 2 weeks after Isabel vanished, he sent his car to Florida, hired the top attorney, and departed without responding to inquiries from the police or media. The private investigator found such behavior odd. Furthermore, Justin still had the key to the house after living there for a long time with the Solis family. According to one version, Justin might owe someone money because he had previously spent the night in Isabel's room. The criminal would come for him, but instead of Justin, they would find Isabel in the room and take her as leverage, or as ransom. Sebastian Hartsfield, a friend of his, is certain that Master Mourinho made the correct decision and would have left as well if he had the money. The problem is that Justin was fed up with the public's and media's invasive attention. Sebastian claimed that he and Justin spent the night of the kidnapping together. He reluctantly acknowledges that he and Justin smoked and drank all evening because it was April 20, National Cannabis Day. Sebastian is certain that his friend is innocent, even though there was a 6-hour lapse while they were sleeping, and he is unsure of Justin's whereabouts. The police chief stated that the investigator the family had hired had no evidence, but the police were certain of Justin's innocence when they finally questioned him. It is noteworthy that Sergio's daughter was abducted for ransom and that he was also suspected of owing money to criminals. Isabel was at the age when family members most frequently kidnap children. Sergio kissed her goodnight at 11 o'clock, the last person to see her after she was abducted from the house where only her family members were present. He failed the polygraph exam. Furthermore, the dog's nighttime barking serves as an indirect indication that a family member was involved. How could an outsider be aware of the girl's room location, the fact that she wouldn't be sleeping in her brother's bedroom, and the fact that her room would be dog-free? Her bedroom was usually where at least one of them slept. How could the kidnapper have known exactly how to get past the street security cameras? However, aside from suspicion, neither Justin nor Sergio were connected to the crime. Isabel was where? Rewind to the morning of July 23, 2012, when 3 distress calls were received by the rescue service. A young girl called to report that she had been kidnapped. "He's coming," she said, mentioning Isabel's name and identifying the district in which she was located, before the call ended. The officers searched the designated district but were unable to locate anyone. 2 sisters, ages 9 and 11, lived in the apartment complex where they traced the call. The sisters had just chosen to pull a practical joke. Despite the commotion, the calls were promptly released. However, the city had to pay $4,700 in officers' wages for the search in the district the girls had designated because of their joke. The police made multiple attempts to raise awareness of the case after this incident, such as posting a picture of Isabel's potential appearance years later. However, the case remained unresolved for years in spite of all efforts. Who took Isabel hostage? Was she taken by someone the family didn't know who came in through a window? Did Justin think about kidnapping Isabel in order to demand a ransom because he was in debt, but the kidnapping didn't work out? Are there relatives hiding what happened to her? And was one of her brothers complicit? Or is the biological father of Isabel more knowledgeable than he claims to be? Unexpectedly, the case made a breakthrough on February 8, 2017. Melissa called the FBI and said they should talk to her fiancé, Christopher Clements, regarding Isabel's disappearance. They should speak with him because, allegedly, he might know something about the girl's disappearance. But Melissa was unable to elaborate. It was easy to find Christopher because he was incarcerated on robbery charges. Christopher assured the agents that he was aware of Isabel's location, but he insisted on a bargain in return for information on her whereabouts. In Isabel's case, he demanded complete immunity, the dismissal of his charges, and the return of his seized Acura Honda. He reassured them that only he and a member of the Solis family are aware of the girl's fate. He made hints that Sergio was aware of and complicit in his daughter's kidnapping. Christopher informed them that at a nearby pawn shop, Sergio was observed giving Mexican gold coins to a customer. After an alleged altercation, Isabel was taken to collect the money her father owed for the pilfered coins. Regardless of how much the agents probed him, Christopher stayed away from specifics and spoke in general terms. The man refused to back down, a deal in exchange for information. He achieved his goal. After negotiating, the prosecutor's office dropped the robbery charges and gave the car back. On March 3, 2017, the police and FBI discovered Isabel's remains after the man gave them the location. Rebecca and Sergio Solis had to confront the sobering realization that Isabel had permanently departed. Any hopes they had of a joyful reunion were dashed. Christopher Clements did not, however, get the freedom he had hoped for from the agreement. He was instead taken to the Maricopa County Jail, where he was accused of committing another robbery. Full immunity, which Christopher insisted on in Isabel's case, was not provided by the agreement. Investigators started looking into the man's past in greater detail. He committed first-degree violence when he was 16 years old, beginning his criminal career. Ever since, he had been in trouble on several occasions. The man's ex-wife claimed that Christopher was compelled to sleep in the car until they left, frequently brought girls home from strip clubs, and was obsessed with adult films. He was employed at a shopping mall just 2 kilometers from Isabel's residence when she vanished. Detectives definitely looked into Sergio's relationship to the local pawn shop that Christopher had mentioned. 2 months prior to Isabel's kidnapping, they learned that 21 gold coins had been taken from a woman's home, and they assumed Christopher was the thief. Hours after the theft, he was seen on the security camera entering the pawn shop, delivering the items, and taking the cash. Sergio's involvement or any connection to the case was not implied in the video. Christopher was probably merely researching the charges against Sergio that were reported in the media and speaking with agents in an attempt to discredit the girl's father. A search warrant for the home where Christopher and his fiancée Melissa previously resided was among the many that the police were issued. Investigators discovered a sheet of plywood in one corner of the yard, beneath which was a plastic container filled with ashes and a number of gory finds, such as a faded, lilac child's hooded hoodie and a very young child's school assignment with the name Mercedes on it. She was Isabel Mercedes Solis in full. On Christopher's devices, they also discovered explicit images of girls between the ages of 3 and 13. His computer was searched for Isabel Solis, unsolved cases in Arizona, and child killer acquitted. According to a former acquaintance, Christopher discussed the Isabel case and hinted that there might be evidence in his car's trunk. Thus, its return was essential. The vehicle, a Honda Acura, was reportedly given back to the man in return for details regarding Isabel's location. Although Isabel's cause of death is still unknown, the same acquaintance claims that she was suffocated and that chemicals were poured over her body. The man recalled that Christopher had concealed pictures of the Solis house in a Bible in his room and showed them to him. In addition to obtaining a warrant for this Bible, investigators did discover images of the house. After 2 months, the Tucson police chief declared that they had a suspect, Christopher Clements, 36, who was accused of 2 murders. The problem is that when Christopher told 2 agents on March 3, 2017, where they would find Isabel, he pointed out a crucial marker, a stack of tires that obviously did not appear there in a single day. The agents were immediately alarmed by this instruction, because the police had discovered the body of a teenage girl from Tucson near that same tire pile a few years prior. Maribel Gonzalez was the girl's name. Isabel had been missing for 2 years when a rescue service dispatcher received a terrifying call in June 2014. A woman reported seeing a body by the side of the road. When the police arrived on the scene, they discovered a naked body buried beneath the tire pile, the smell of decay and evidence that someone had been dragged on the ground. The place was a long way from the closest residences. In an attempt to identify the girl, the police sent a picture of the tattoo on her collarbone and a chain with an anchor that she was wearing to the media. In fact, a number of people reported that it was 13-year-old Maribel Gonzalez to the police. According to Maribel's relatives, she was seeing Mariano, a man in his 20s. A month before Maribel vanished, they ended their 3-year relationship. Around 11 or 12 p.m., Mariano told the police she sent him a message. She had a fight with her mother the day she vanished, so she asked him to come get her. He had to get up early for work, so he disregarded her message. She was never seen by him again. Even at night, she enjoyed taking solitary walks, according to her boyfriend. She also enjoyed visiting the mall, which is the same one where Christopher Clements worked and is close to Isabel's house. Because the bodies were discovered close to one another, the police were able to connect these cases. Maribel's DNA and Christopher's DNA were compared, and they matched. 2 years prior to Maribel, Isabella was abducted and murdered. Could Maribel's death have been avoided if the offender had been apprehended following the initial crime? As it turns out, Christopher's name was mentioned multiple times during the investigation, prior to his 2018 conversation with the agents. As is already known, the officers got in touch with everyone who lived close to Isabel and committed sexual offenses, which are violent crimes against women and children. Christopher was one of 16 names on the list. He was classified as a Class 3 offender, which means that he has a very high chance of committing the same crime again. He spoke with the police, but he clearly managed to persuade the officer that he was unrelated to the case. Maybe he had an alibi from his girlfriend. In addition, Isabel's parents requested that anyone who might raise suspicions, such as traders, distributors, advertising agents, unannounced visitors, or unexpected meetings, be remembered after Isabel vanished. Rebecca thought of the man who had shown interest in their red Acura right away. Despite his 2 visits, he never entered the house, and the woman was unaware of his name. It's interesting that during the interrogations, Christopher also brought up that encounter. On February 10, 2017, he told FBI agents this. He claimed that two individuals feigned interest in the vehicle. Actually, they had to confirm that Sergio actually resided at that address. Rebecca gave them her phone number and insisted that they speak with her husband Sergio about the possibility of purchasing from him. The men thus verified their desire. Christopher claimed that although he was aware of the visit, he had never gone to the Solis residence. However, he repeatedly used the pronoun we rather than they throughout the conversation, seemingly admitting that one of the men was actually him. With one exception, the woman described only one man who fit Christopher's description and drove the same car as him. Her account of the visit deviates slightly from her husband's account, but otherwise, it is consistent with Rebecca's account. What if this lead had been pursued by the police right away after Isabel vanished? Would they have found Christopher Clements as a result? Investigators think Isabel was not abducted on her own initiative. Christopher's crimes were premeditated. When the woman from whom he had stolen gold coins was not home, he called her house several times. As early as October 2011, he also made a call to the seller's family residence. Christopher washed his car and changed his phone number the day after the kidnapping. He usually pays about $10.35 to have his car cleaned, but this time he paid $110. However, since phone records connected Christopher to two crimes, changing his number did not help. The shoes that Christopher was frequently spotted wearing and even photographed in, but which none of the Solis family wore, matched the footprints discovered at the scene of Isabel's abduction. Investigators also examined images on his devices and discovered a small snapshot. It was a selfie of a man who resembled Clements, sitting in the front seat of a car, and a young girl who was lying on the back seat and looked a lot like Isabel. Rebecca and Sergio saw the picture. The woman acknowledged that the girl looked like Isabel, but the poor quality of the picture prevented her from being certain. When Melissa, his fiancée, saw the picture, she started to shake, despite Christopher's claims that the child in it was his son. The child did not seem like her own. The 1.5-year-old boy with the fair hair did not look like the child in the picture. Rather, it resembled a girl with dark hair who had her hair braided, a style that Isabel's mother had adopted shortly before the abduction. The defense contended that Christopher was not carrying his phone when he made those calls. The footprints were first identified as work boots, and the blood in Isabel's bedroom most likely existed prior to the kidnapping. In order to prevent the prosecutor from presenting evidence for both crimes at once, Christopher's attorneys were successful in their efforts to have the Isabel case and the Maribel case tried separately. But since he had already been convicted of Maribel Gonzalez's murder, this did him little good. He is still awaiting trial for Isabel's abduction. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. This was a mass killer confessing his darkest intentions, but the real horror was the cold, calculated execution of his crime, captured in real time. On June 5, 2014, Ybarra brutally entered the Seattle Pacific University lobby and took his first victim. He had planned a massacre, but that was not what happened. During one of Seattle's worst crises, a single small mistake set off a series of events that would change everything. There were a number of horrifying facts that were just waiting to be revealed. June 5, 2014, started out like any other day until, shortly before 3 p.m., a string of calls from the same location flooded the Seattle Police Department's helplines. The city would be thrown into an unimaginable crisis and chaos in a matter of minutes. A nightmare started when a man carrying a gun entered SPU. With each call, more terrifying information surfaced. The description initially appeared ambiguous and unremarkable, but the details were beginning to come together. He wasn't an aspiring pupil. His purpose for being on campus that day was darker. But why was he there, and who was he? They would soon find out more about his nefarious schemes. The white pickup van he was driving was seen parked on the street close to the Seattle Pacific University campus in Washington. This man, whoever he was, had no intention of going away quietly. And just as police closed in, something far worse was about to happen. Paul Lee, a 22-year-old random student, was struck by the first bullet. The question was no longer who he was. The van belonged to 26-year-old Aaron Ybarra. Now the only question was, how far would he go? A massacre was in the making, and the police seemed like they might be too late to stop it. Officers moved in, sirens heightening the tension across the campus, but no one knew what they were truly walking into, or how the standoff would unfold. Even before the police arrived, the action had already taken place, captured on camera as it all played out in real time. The man, whose identity was now confirmed to be Aaron Ybarra, could be seen walking into the hallway calmly, as if he belonged there. The CCTV captured everything, every step, every glance, but no one knew what was coming next. There, sitting innocently at the desk, was 22-year-old Tristan Ruth, unaware his life was about to hang in the balance. The man leaned in close and threatened him. "Don't move, or there will be consequences." But it wasn't just Tristan in the building, unaware of the danger. Sarah Williams, 22, had just reached the bottom when Ybarra turned and shot without thinking. Sarah was shot at close range in the chest. Tristan saw his opportunity then, and he took desperate action. The gunman would not be as fortunate, though, as his next move would be the demise of his entire scheme. Aaron's statements were obviously more than just threats. He was shooting people, and he had a clear plan that was only a few seconds away from causing total mayhem. However, he then committed a critical error. A security guard caught the gunman as he stopped to reload his weapon. A 22-year-old student and security guard named John Mice came up behind the shooter. Everything suddenly changed in a split second. He wrestled the shooter to the ground, wrenched the gun out of his hands, and pepper-sprayed his eyes. Aaron, the shooter, was on the ground with his eyes burning, and Sarah, the injured girl, took the opportunity to step aside. John moved away with the weapon to keep it out of the shooter's reach, but when he returned, he'd find a surprise. Aaron had produced a knife from his pocket. Next, John would engage in a physical altercation with the pepper-sprayed Aaron to remove the weapon from his grip. He was going to have unexpected help. Suddenly, a second hero, Justin Sarah, kicked the weapon out of Aaron's reach, ensuring it would do no harm. What was seconds away from becoming a massacre was stopped in its tracks, thanks to their courage. But the tragedy was nowhere near an end, and what came next was going to expose the harsh reality that changed everything. By 3:29 p.m., paramedics and officers from the Seattle Police Department flooded the campus. Officers immediately apprehended Aaron after finding John Mice and Justin Sarah holding him down on the hall floor. One team of police officers took Aaron into custody, while the second took hold of his van. Paramedics treated several students for shock, while Paul Lee, Sarah Williams, and John Mice were all transported to Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. Paul was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. Sarah was taken to surgery right away because her condition was critical. Despite Thomas's critical condition, medical personnel managed to stabilize him, and he was admitted to the hospital. After receiving treatment for the cuts he sustained during his fight with Aaron, John was allowed to go. However, this was not the end of the story. They thought the worst was over when the police showed up to remove the gun. They were unaware that the shooter was hiding something much darker than anyone could have predicted. After being brought to the homicide and assault unit of the Seattle Police Department, Aaron was informed of his Miranda rights. Detectives Dana Duffy and James Cooper then brought him in for an interview. What secrets was he concealing, and what was his true motivation? The truth was finally going to be revealed in the interrogation room, where the answers were hidden. Aaron was still recuperating from the pepper spray, so detectives Cooper and Duffy took a while to begin the interview. They started by inquiring about his private life. Janice and Ambrose Ybarra welcomed Aaron into the world in July 1988. He grew up in Seattle's Mount Lake Terrace neighborhood with his younger brother Joel and older sister Brandy. From the start, Aaron's life was described as turbulent. Ambrose, his alcoholic father, was a frequent source of conflict for the family. Aaron discussed his psychological issues, including his severe OCD, as he became more at ease during the interrogation. As the investigators spoke with this profoundly disturbed individual, They discovered that his OCD was only the beginning of his psychological problems, which started when he was 13 years old. Innocent students were suffering on the SPU campus because of a sin that only existed in Aaron's troubled mind and about which they knew nothing. When Aaron was little, his family made the decision to rearrange the furniture in his bedroom. Aaron claims that he became fixated on the status quo and that this changed him. Aaron had realized that respect could be gained by using fear. The mass murderer Eric Harris served as his initial source of inspiration. But there was another reason why he preferred using guns to cause harm. Aaron loved firearms just as much as his father and brother did, and he even spent 8 years working at a Mount Lake Terrace gun range. He was a competitive shooter who was said to be extremely proficient with a firearm. Aaron was characterized as pleasant, shy, and humorous by some of the people who had met him at work. People were unaware, however, that the quiet young man was harboring demons. The theft of Aaron's firearms was the last straw. The compulsive Aaron couldn't get over it and was convinced that he detested everyone. According to Aaron's delusions, the evil side was ready to take control. Perhaps the fatal outcomes could have been avoided if he had received therapy sooner, but that was not to be. Aaron had only begun therapy as a result of pressure from those close to him to get help. After quitting therapy, he brought his unsettling mission to SPU within a month. The next thing Aaron would say to investigators would make it impossible for it to be anything other than a premeditated crime, something he and his attorney would sincerely regret in court. Aaron's plans for July 5, 2014 were well defined. He aspired to end his life, just like one of his heroes did. It was supposed to be a declaration, but the students never took Aaron seriously and were unable to comprehend the full scope of what they had to deal with that day. He claimed that he was treated disrespectfully and that to be respected was to instill fear. Paul Lee, a 19-year-old student, was standing there. He took Aaron lightly, which was a fatal error. Aaron told the two detectives that he kept his plans a secret from everyone. Nevertheless, he documented everything in his journal and hoped that if he were killed in the shooting, others would comprehend his motivations. Aaron talked to Detective Duffy one-on-one during the interview, telling her that he had realized something was wrong with him, but that his hatred eventually got the better of him. Aaron appeared to have accepted his fate and realized that his actions would have a severe impact on his life and future by the end of the interrogation. As investigators got to work on their case against Aaron Ybarra, students began to return to campus life and resume their regular activities in the wake of the tragedy. Aaron had only managed to kill one person, but his goal was much more deadly: to cause widespread devastation. However, the prosecution was aware that the defense was preparing for a tough fight as they worked tirelessly to create a strong case. The real battle was only getting started. Aaron Ybarra was put on trial for his crimes on October 10, 2016. Prosecutors weren't going to let Aaron's defense team get away with a lesser charge or sentence, even though they were already ready to use the insanity plea as their argument in the case. According to defense lawyer Ramona Brandis, Aaron experienced crippling bouts of mental illness and depression, which caused him to hear the voice of God, who urged him to go on a murderous rampage. She also questioned his upbringing and his unstable home life, claiming that he never got the support he actually required. Aaron's victims' testimonies were crucial to establishing the case as it actually was. Paul Lee was the worst hit, followed by Sarah Williams. Before she could resume her regular life, she spent days in the hospital. She made an effort to describe the pain she endured in court. The entire scene in the SPU lobby where he and John Mice had overpowered Aaron was described by Justin Sarah. Ramona, the defense lawyer, also contended that Aaron's actions were influenced by his upbringing and unstable home life, because he had sought professional help for his years-long mental illness. Under the direction of Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney Kristen Richardson of King County, the prosecution team was ready for the insanity defense. Aaron's own words were going to be used against him by the prosecution. They provided evidence that Aaron had voluntarily stopped taking his medication and quit therapy in order to allow his dark side to take control, shattering the notion that he did not receive assistance for his mental health problems. The assertion that Aaron was getting assistance from at least one family member was supported by testimony from his mother, Janice. His journal also provided evidence to the prosecution that he had premeditatedly planned and executed the shootings. Additionally, The recorded interrogation by detectives Cooper and Duffy was made available to the jurors, demonstrating Aaron's complete awareness of his actions and the repercussions. Aaron tells detectives in the video that he was inspired and motivated by Sung Hui Cho and Eric Harris, but he makes no mention of hearing the voices of God or Satan. Although the prosecution acknowledged that Aaron had serious mental health problems, they made it abundantly evident that Aaron planned and chose to carry out the shooting. Now that the sentence was just a few seconds away, everyone was wondering if the jury would feel the same way. Following weeks of testimony and arguments from the prosecution and defense, the jury returned a guilty verdict on November 16, 2016. Aaron was convicted of 1 count of assault, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and premeditated first-degree murder. Judge Jim Rogers sentenced Aaron Ybarra to 112 years in prison on February 17, 2017, for the shooting at Seattle Pacific University. Aaron spoke to the courtroom full of SPU employees, students, family members, and surviving victims during his sentencing. Aaron was the center of attention, but nobody was emotionally ready for what he said next. He apologized for the horrible crime he had committed. In addition, he expressed regret for killing Paul Lee, whom he hoped was still alive. Speaking to the survivor of the attack, Sarah Williams, he told her that she did not deserve the events of that day. Aaron expressed his desire to go back and change everything, but he acknowledged that it was too late. He will be housed at the King County Adult Detention Center for the duration of his sentence. John Mize was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor in 2015 for his valiant efforts to apprehend the SPU shooter. Since the 2014 shooting, Aaron Ybarra's family has stayed out of the spotlight. The public and social media spheres still contain scant if any information about his family members and their lives. Paul Lee's legacy endures in the lives of his family and friends. Soon after Paul's memorial service in June 2014, the Lee family established the Paul Lee Foundation. The goal of the foundation was to carry on Paul's work of supporting those who experienced mental health problems and depression. It was cruelly ironic. He wanted to help people with mental illnesses, but before he could complete his education, he was harmed by someone he would have preferred to assist. The foundation has made it its mission to raise money to support groups that conduct research and create solutions to assist people with mental health conditions. Many people will be discussing what caused Aaron Ybarra to become a school shooter in this case today. Seeing young lives lost so needlessly and murderers succumbing to their own mental health problems is heartbreaking. Could something have been done to prevent this tragedy, considering Aaron's family life was, to put it mildly, turbulent? Or was he destined to become a killer? Before he committed suicide, he was troubled, mistrustful of people, and desperate to be remembered. However, he chose to target the helpless students instead of exacting revenge on the innocent or facing down actual villains. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Aurora, then 26 years old, and Mark, then 32, decided to take their honeymoon to the stunning island of Corsica in the late spring of 1995. The girl had chosen this location for their first vacation together after Aurora and Mark got married 2 months prior. The young wife was eager to see Corsica's villages, mountains, and beautiful scenery. They made a stop in the quaint little town of Calvi that day. Here, a restaurant with a view of the bay hosted a candlelit dinner for the newlyweds in the harbor. Following dinner, Aurora and Mark made their way to the Notre Dame de la Serra Chapel, a well-liked tourist destination where lovers go to watch the sunset, the perfect location for a romantic day's end. Around 10:30 in the evening, they got into their car and drove back to the hotel. Right at the end of the railing, some animals abruptly leaped onto the road in front of the car, putting the young couple on a very dangerous road that descended sharply. The car plunged off the cliff as Mark swiftly turned the wheel. Aurora remained calm in spite of the dire circumstances. Before the car fell, she jumped out and opened the door. Mark was less fortunate. He and the car fell 140 meters. Aurora was alive, but she was in shock. In the middle of the night, in complete darkness, she bravely decided to go down barefoot to assist her husband. After locating Mark inside the vehicle, Aurora dragged him out. She washed his face and pulled him by the legs toward the sea. The girl then ascended the cliff once more in order to signal for assistance and stop a passing vehicle. Calvi firefighters showed up on the scene. Her husband was down there with a head injury and unconscious, and Aurora was screaming and sobbing in hysteria. In order to save him, she pleaded with the rescuers to descend as soon as possible. The firefighters immediately made their way to the cliff's base in an attempt to locate Mark, but their search was severely hampered by the night's darkness and the uneven ground. Just finding the car, which was empty, took them 30 minutes. But they saw that the man had a serious head injury and there was a lot of blood. When divers signaled that they had found something at 6 a.m., the weary firefighters were about to give up after hours of unrelenting searching. Mark's body was 3 meters deep in the water, floating next to the car. Unfortunately, it was too late for the newlyweds when they managed to bring his body to the surface. After compiling a report on yet another regrettable incident along that particular stretch of road, the police closed the case. The body of Mark was taken back to his home country of Belgium. The young widow was in complete despair. She spent several days in a specialized clinic after being unable to handle the grief on her own. As Mark's family hurried to comfort her, she proclaimed that she didn't want to see anyone and cut herself off from the outside world. Mark's family didn't press because they understood her mental state. She had lost her husband on their honeymoon when she was 26 years old. However, her actions captivated Mark's family more and more in the days that followed. Slowly, suspicion replaced concern. His parents strongly objected to Aurora's insistence that her husband be cremated. She left the farewell ceremony earlier than anticipated on the day of the funeral, shocking the family even more. The relationship between her and Mark's family has grown more complex ever since. When she got back to the family home, she changed the locks and refused to let her mother-in-law in, who had come to pick up some of her son's sentimental but cheap possessions. Aurora listed the house for sale in the weeks that followed. In addition to the EUR 25000 she received from the sale of the house, there was more. After her husband passed away, it was discovered that she had gotten 7 insurance payouts. Aurora was given EUR 75000 in total. The Van Burr couple, who were shocked by their daughter-in-law's actions, took legal action and complained about the suspicious death. As a result, the coroner demanded that Mark's death circumstances be looked into. Investigators started by researching the couple's lives in order to comprehend what truly transpired that night. Mark Vander, 31, was employed at a reputable financial firm in Brussels in April 1994, about a year prior to the incident. Everything in his life seemed to be going well, or nearly so, and he had a great job, devoted parents, and amiable co-workers. But he had yet to find a woman he wanted to live a lifetime with. Mark wanted to start a family because he was old enough. In Brussels, Mark and Aurora met at a bar. Aurora was selling ironing boards door to door at the time, which wasn't a very lucrative job. There was immediate chemistry between Mark and Aurora. Mark was enamored with the attractive girl and fell in love with her right away. Their lively relationship left Mark's friends in awe and jealousy. Mark was shy, a little overweight, and uninterested in sports, whereas Aurora was very attractive, athletic, and fit. However, Aurora moved in with Mark a few weeks after they first met. Seeing that their son was content with her, the future husband's family embraced her as their future daughter-in-law and the mother of their grandchildren. When the young couple decided to tie the knot a year later, nobody was shocked. The girl asked Mark to put half of the house in her name, among other requirements for her future husband. Although this might have seemed strange or improper, Mark, who was incredibly in love, accepted all of the bride's demands. The young couple exchanged vows on March 11, 1995. Only the bride's twin sister was present from her side of the family, but the entire husband's family was present at the wedding. The husband's family gradually realized that their daughter-in-law avoided discussing her family and evasively responded to all inquiries about her background, education, and relatives. She acted as though she was from a wealthier family than theirs. More than a year after Mark's passing, on September 5, 1996, Aurora received an invitation to be questioned at the police station. She reaffirmed her earlier claims that she and Mark had gone to a chapel after dining at a portside restaurant. A wild animal unexpectedly leapt in front of their car on the way back. An unfortunate accident happened when Mark turned the steering wheel. Aurora opened the door and leaped out just before the car plunged off the cliff. No more information could be gleaned from her by the police. On October 8, 1996, Mark's body was exhumed in an effort to learn the truth. Some of the injuries were caused after death, according to the forensic expert. Although the body had many wounds, none of them were bleeding, suggesting that Mark passed away before the car plunged off the cliff. The widow was nowhere to be found when the police wanted to question her again. 2 years after the incident, the detectives made the decision to look into the crime scene in Corsica. The newlyweds' car plunged into the ravine, and Belgian police officers were at the edge of it. Armed only with photographs and without the car, the task became more difficult. However, the expert was able to reconstruct the car's pre-fall trajectory. A person's reaction to an unexpected event on the road, such as an animal running out, is to turn the steering wheel but not all the way around. Under no circumstances could the car have ended up where it was found if it had veered off the road and fallen into the water. The expert also observed another contradiction in the accident theory. When firefighters arrived on the scene, they reported that the bushes growing on the cliff's top had been crushed. The bushes would have been cut off if the car had sped down. It was clear from the crushed vegetation that the car had remained on the bushes for a while before descending gradually. Additionally, blood droplets were discovered unevenly distributed between the car and the water following the incident, indicating that the body was carried rather than dragged. Could an 80-kilogram man have been carried by Aurora, who weighed less than 50 kg? Aurora's version of events did not match the investigation's conclusions. The car was pushed off the cliff, according to the experts' conclusive findings. The investigators were now interested in learning what transpired following the incident. Did Aurora come down to assist Mark? Did she have the bravery and strength to go barefoot down the rocks? It was possible, as hard as it may seem to believe. Since Aurora Martin was a skilled athlete and a champion rock climber, the police found it difficult to deny that she had truly gone down to assist her husband. For them, it was a dead end. Since there was still no update on the young lady, the investigators made the decision to learn more about her past. Really, who is she? What secrets are concealed by her evasive responses? In actuality, the girl had a very challenging upbringing, devoid of both a loving family and a quality education. Her mother moved to Germany after her parents divorced when she was 12, so she hardly ever saw her daughter. Although her father was not very involved in her life, she led a carefree life with her 2 sisters. With lofty aspirations, the girl left her childhood home when she turned 18. Aurora entered beauty pageants in hopes of becoming a model, but was not very successful. She thus found employment as a bar hostess and occasionally as an escort service model. At the age of 24, Aurora made the most of her beauty and lived life to the fullest. In February 1993, she went to a rock climbing club one day as usual, where she met Peter Schwett, who would be her fateful encounter. He shared her love of mountaineering and was young, attractive, and wealthy. She was 24 years old and he was 23. At first sight, it was love. Aurora was able to move on from her previous life next to Peter. This tale sounded too good to be true. In fact, the investigators discovered an oddity while looking into Peter Schwett's past. He was a widower for a young man his age. The circumstances surrounding his wife's death were suspicious. 2 years earlier, on his 21st birthday, Peter was serving in the German army in Belgium. Peter liked going to clubs, and one night he met Ursula Deschamps, a young student, while he was out with friends. They fell in love quickly, and 3 months later Peter proposed to her. Ursula soon learned, though, that Peter was not content with a single woman. Other surprises were in store for her. At their house, Ursula discovered counterfeit documents and substantial sums of money. She wanted to tell the police what she had discovered. Their young marriage became strained, and they made the decision to file for divorce. However, Peter was supposed to teach his wife how to drive, so he and Ursula got into a convertible and left on a trip on the evening of August 29, 1992. The outing was peculiar for soon-to-be ex-houses. Peter was behind the wheel and driving as fast as he always does. The car crashed into a canal at high speed after he lost control. Although Peter was able to flee in time, he was unable to save his wife, who perished in the water with the car. He remembered that even though he touched her hand, he was unable to grasp her and drag her to the surface. A few days later, Ursula's body was discovered. Nothing from the autopsy would raise any questions about the girl's drowning. Peter provided a convincing explanation of how he had gotten out of the car through the rear window when the police recreated the crime scene. However, Ursula's family never thought it was a sad accident. First of all, Peter had never lowered the top of a convertible before. Second, Ursula could swim very well. An expert who later examined the case claimed that Ursula had time to get out of the car because drowning takes 3 minutes or so as the water fills the car. The Belgian police, however, handled it as a regrettable mishap brought on by the driver's carelessness. The case was closed after the young widower received a sentence of 3 months in prison. Investigators couldn't help but notice coincidences between two scenarios, two crime scenes, and two cases. In both instances, a traffic accident occurred. The car ended up in the water after the driver lost control. While the other spouse's body was not discovered in the vehicle, one of the spouses was able to flee in time. Since Aurora and Peter were now the primary suspects in the murder of Mark Vander, detectives had an immediate need to locate them. Although investigators suspected Peter of Ursula's murder as well, it was possible to drop the possibility of charging him with the same crime again because Peter had already served 3 months in connection with that case. In the meantime, the police discovered the likely cause of Ursula's death and the reason Peter became so rich following the death of his wife. He was able to leave the army and woo the stunning Aurora after receiving an insurance payout of $1,500. After a year of romance, the young couple broke up in early 1994 for unspecified reasons. The girl registered with a marriage agency during this period. According to her, the perfect man would be well off, have a flat of his own, be amiable, and not be overweight. Her relationship with Mark Van Burr began in April 1994. The girl insured Mark in August 1994, 4 months after they first met. It's interesting to note that the documents had Aurora's signature rather than Mark's, indicating that he was obviously ignorant of this. She signed the paperwork on his behalf, claiming that his hand was hurt. Before long, a regrettable incident happened. After selling the house and getting the insurance money, Aurora vanished. She wasn't hidden for very long, though. Investigators discovered her trace in Luxembourg 2 months after Mark was murdered. She opened a bank account and deposited EWAR 275000 into it. She and someone named Peter Schwett were the only ones with access to the account. Had they gotten back together and relocated to Miami, Florida? Before, an article in a major French newspaper referred to them as diabolical lovers and detailed the police suspicions against them. The couple had been living a lavish lifestyle for nearly 2 years, complete with fancy apartments, cars, and a yacht. Peter and Aurora grew extremely wary. They only used telephone booths to make calls and altered their appearance. Before Peter was taken into custody in a supermarket parking lot, they were able to remain hidden for a while. He offered the police the roughly $50,000 he was carrying in exchange for their release, but they turned him down. Aurora was taken into custody by the police in the apartment where the lovers were hiding 2 days later. Aurora and Peter made every effort to evade extradition. Nevertheless, they were sent back to Belgium on December 3, 1998. Aurora declined to provide any testimony right away. In contrast, Peter talked a lot, but not much of it was accurate. The police had no hard evidence against them because they obviously did not want to cooperate with the investigation. An anonymous phone call altered the case's trajectory. Over the phone, a woman disclosed that she had information regarding Mark's murder. The woman was later identified by the police as Fabienne Lefevre. Aurora's stepmother, Fabienne, had recently split from the girl's father and made the decision to either get even or atone for her transgressions. According to Fabienne, she hurried to the hospital to console her stepdaughter following the tragedy in Corsica, but the girl who met her was entirely different, not even in mourning. Fabienne claims that Aurora told her everything. It was all Peter's doing, she said, and he handled everything. Peter and 3 accomplices, his German friends, pulled over Aurora and Mark as they were on the road. They used baseball bats to beat Mark. Fabienne claims that because Mark pleaded with the men to spare his wife and let her go, he was unaware of the betrayer until the very end. They loaded Mark's body into the car and pushed it off a cliff after the beating was finished. However, because it didn't fit Peter's personality, the police were unable to track down the accomplices or provide evidence of their existence. Furthermore, there were numerous questions regarding Fabienne's veracity. First, there was tension between Fabienne and Aurora. Second, why did she make an anonymous call, and why did she call the police sooner? She was afraid, the woman said. However, the police sought additional evidence because they were certain that Fabienne's words alone could not be used to build a strong case. Police in Germany discovered that one of Peter's brothers had postcards from Corsica and pictures of the car that crashed off the cliff. The interesting thing about these souvenir photos is that they were taken 6 months prior to Mark's murder. Was it deliberate planning or just a coincidence? 4 years had gone by since the murder, but the specifics of the crime were still unknown. The police made the decision to recreate the airport crime scene on June 16, 1999. The vehicle was being driven by the driver at a maximum speed of 35 kilometers per hour. As if attempting to leap out, Aurora was supposed to open the car door wide. Even when the car slowed down considerably, she didn't do it. In an attempt to find an explanation for her failure, she lost her temper, started crying, and had hysterical outbursts. Peter stepped in and tried to protect Aurora. Since, in theory, he was not present at the crime scene in Corsica, it is unclear why he was involved in the reconstruction at all. Following this experiment, the researchers were certain that Mark Van Burr was murdered rather than killed in an accident. The trial started. A revised version of events was put forth by the defendant's attorneys, who claimed that Mark had a heart attack shortly before he fell from a height. Put another way, since he passed away just seconds before the collision, all of his subsequent injuries were post-mortem. This hypothesis had the potential to disprove the prosecution's entire theory. Such a version did not match the autopsy results, but even the forensic expert thought it was a smart move. Another crucial detail that the forensic expert disclosed during the trial was that Mark had not eaten anything for several hours prior to the crime. He was starving. The juror's last straw was when Aurora even made up a story about having a romantic dinner with her husband that night. Both of them were convicted. Peter received a 20-year sentence, and Aurora received a 15-year sentence. They probably didn't even complete half of their sentences. They were made available a long time ago. As of 2021, they remained together even after Aurora was forbidden from leaving the country, and Peter was deported to Germany. Peter secured employment as a carpenter, and Aurora is employed due to her multilingualism. The most amazing aspect of this case is that Aurora and Peter committed 2 nearly flawless murders. If Aurora had been a little more patient and hadn't slammed the door in front of her husband's family, the second murder would have probably gone undetected. She would have quietly left after a few months if she had continued to be the kind girl they knew, and the Van Burr family would never have suspected her of anything. And that wraps up today's chilling story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss a new upload. Also, let me know in the comments what part of this story shocked you the most. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.